So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Salzman, and they've treated thousands of patients. They have a lot of great information to share.
Just looking for my slides there. Cool. All right, can everyone hear me and see me? Very cool. And just poll the audience that I know how to curtail the talk. Who was here previously for the CE or CME credits? Very good. I'll get less sciencey and more about the practice then. Who is a medical card holder in the state of Illinois? Anyone a healthcare provider? All right, cool mix of people. I'm George, this is Stephen. Hello.
Up to the mouth.
Up to the mouth.
So we can hear the
Much better.
Yeah.
You can all hear me, you can all see me. Now you can try to get started. I'm George, this is Steve. The title of the talk is Medicated and Educated, How Cannabis Works as a Medicine. I'd like to thank Rita, Lisa, her staff for inviting us. We've done one of these before. It's been a nice, cool journey that we'll discuss with you. I also appreciate that I can wear jeans and t-shirt to this talk. It's my fourth one this week, and I don't feel comfortable in suits. The style of talk that Steve and I typically give is pretty lax. It's more of a conversation than a presentation. So at any point in the discussion, interrupt me, ask questions, and we can and have a candid discussion about what our practice does and the state of things in Illinois. Cool. We're not cool enough to have any disclosures. Because most of you in the room just attended a talk where a lot of plant-based science was discussed, I will just say that the concept of looking is not one. In fact, this month is, part of this month is celebrated as National Pharmacist Month. And I found this really interesting slide. It was actually a press release in 1932 to promote national pharmacists states. Particular state, those pharmacists had access to particular plants, which were all compounded. And this is before the influence of big pharma, where physician and pharmacists worked together to compound and create herbal medications, which were used for treatment for compendia reasons. Jim? All right. So most people in this room know that Illinois has a medical cannabis program. Steve and I have been involved in that program for the last 3 years, conceptualized probably 4. And we'll tell you a little bit about our practice, but generally speaking, what we've learned in the last session, what I'll briefly discuss in this session, is that cannabis in the space of medical really refers to 2 species. And those 2 favorable species are Cannabis indica and Cannabis sativa. There's a third cannabis plant, Gavrilos, which you don't very few compounds found in these plants. There are over 480 plus compounds. We focus on cannabinoids, and the FDA has studied 20 plus themselves. So the dorky science part is coming up, which is that up until the 1980s, we really didn't know how cannabis affected the body on a molecular level. And so it wasn't discovered until the late 1980s that there was an entire system that Stephen and I didn't learn about in our training formally, which was the endocannabinoid system, which is comprised of 2 main receptor types, CB1 and CB2. And those work in different places in the body, and we target those with different molecules derived from the plant to deal with a number of health conditions or presenting symptoms of qualifying conditions in the state of Illinois. They can be found specifically in the central nervous system, they can be found specifically in tissue nervous and the peripheral system, or they can be found in both. And within those two receptors, at those two receptors, a number of cannabinoids, those molecules that you learned about in the previous talks, have action. Now, for the purposes of most talks, the ones that are really focused on in the psychoactive and non-psychoactive component categories are delta-9 THC, 11-hydroxy-delta-9 THC, and CBD. These two being the psychoactive components of the plant, CBD not. And I just, not to go overboard go again, which I enjoy, generally speaking, what's important to know is that when you introduce delta-9 THC into the body, that reaction, all the things that Maja talked about in the last talk about its conversion, happens at a molecular level in the liver. And so 11-hydroxy THC is the main component which elicits the psychoactive effects that most people have a grasp on, which is then further hydrolyzed to give you an inactive compound, THC-COOH. Why is this important, especially in the discussion we could have, is that testing methodology, particularly in law enforcement and in pre-employment screens, etc., mostly tests for this, the inactive component. It's easy to get in urine, and it doesn't really show active metabolites. Saliva, blood, and plasma all test for delta-9 THC, and so we can have that discussion. But I just thought I'd put this up there to let you know that there are different parts of the metabolic process that are tested for with different cannabis-related tests. Cool. And so, why are these things beneficial? Why did Steve and I get PTSD? The way that most of those etiologies present and the way that that pathology progresses is by neural-to-neural communication. And one nerve and one muscle cell to another communicate via synapse, where they send these molecules across that gap to communicate with the next person down the line. It's almost a domino effect. Different cannabinoids have an effect on the cellular level to either increase, decrease, dull, or make that perception of signal stronger. And so I'll save time at the end because Lisa wants this to be a very good discussion about what we do, what treatment plans we derive, why we decide to use what we decide to use, and how we think it affects patients at a cellular level. When Stephen and I see patients, and Stephen will go through the patient process, one of the things, a lot of things go into consideration when we put together a treatment plan. From strain type or hybrid strain types, to consumption method, to dose, to frequency, and follow-up. And listed here, which we can talk about further, are just some of the consumption methods that we use every day in our practice. From inhalation to oral, to topical, and sublingual. I think probably the most interesting part of this talk is going to be how we started, what we do, and how we've grown. And it really started out 4 years ago. Steve and I had known each other for what, maybe 10, 12 years. He actually trained me when I was a resident at the institution where he operated at. We moved on in our academic. And I said, yeah, of course. And now what? What do we do? And there were different models in the state, and we wanted to do something unique. And so the brainchild of Green Care Medical came about, and I want to hand it over for Steve to tell you how that brainchild has grown into what it is today. Steve?
Thank you. Myself and George, like you heard, started practice several years ago. I'm a trauma surgeon and an expert in critical care medicine. I ran trauma at Christ for 15 years. My partner George, obviously still at Christ, running the critical care pharmacies. We're basically the only standalone cannabis practice that I know in the state. We see patients, we certify them, we manage them through their course. And so when we went through, it became instantly obvious how and why things needed to be done. And it was a phased approach. Phase 1 was sleep. Well, we got patients sleeping 6 to 7 plus hours a night, real sleep, deep sleep, stage 4 sleep, where healing occurs, where reset occurs. We reset patients' biorhythms and circadian rhythms. their response and perception of pain, the logic and critical and reasoning centers of the brain, stress hormones were kept in check, and it bled into phase 2, symptom management, pain, anxiety, tremors. People started to feel better. And it was clear that those two phases were intimately linked. I also realized there was a phase 3. And if I was going to do things correctly, I needed to quit my job and just do that. And I called it the Take Back Your Life phase, because everybody had it, but it was unique. 5 knee surgeries, physical therapy, veteran, psychotherapy, diet, weight management, exercise, weaning of narcotics and benzos and sleep meds and antidepressants and psychotics. All that stuff was in there. Because in the end, the formula was actually quite simple. If you sleep like shit and you feel like shit, nobody gets better, and it doesn't matter what you do. And how do I know? Because I'm some great trauma surgeon? No, because I'm a patient. I've had 8 spine surgeries. I've had 2 spine surgeries in the last year. The last one left me with a walker and a diaper. I know what it's like to get cut. I know what it's like to be stuck on opiates. I know what it's like to not sleep and have that anxiety and panic and insomnia and depression. And then it just infiltrates through your whole goddamn life. The next thing you know, it's not just that, right? I'm in pain, and now I'm not sleeping. And I'm not sleeping, I'm in pain, and now I'm anxious. And I'm not sleeping, I'm in pain, and I'm anxious, I'm depressed. And I eat like crap, and I don't go to the gym, and. It goes all the way down to patient's brains break, and then you come down, and you start doing stuff like this. Catastrophizing. I don't remember the last time I slept. I don't remember the last time I wasn't in pain. Just noise that the brain begins to make. Well, so what was the fix? The fix is coming about it, not necessarily at a Western medicine way, but a more comprehensive way. Sleep. Load the CBD and get that anti-inflammatory effect. Get patients feeling better. And then it became a much bigger thing. I don't want to really go into it right now, but neuroplasticity. Essentially toilet training the brain. Reconnecting the brain to that pre-injury, pre-disease, pre-trauma state. And that's what was happening in the clinic. And pot was great for the pain, the anxiety, and some of the other symptomatology. And of course, sleep. But once you started fixing things in the end, once you feel better, patients wanted to feel better. And in the end, if I was really being down and dirty, the practice has actually very little to do with pod probably, and more about building 2.0 versions of patients with toolboxes to deal with relapse and flare-ups and stress. But without that commonality of using the cannabis to get patients into that quote-unquote zone, we couldn't make any inroads in anything else. And I'll be very honest that, what do we want? When patients come back in 3 months after they see me, I need to hear 2 things. Salzman, I'm sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night and I'm feeling 10 to 20% better. If you're anywhere in that zone, you're in business. Truth be told, anecdotally, looking at the data over several thousand patients, it's probably about 40%. But we were looking for about 50 to 60% in 6 to 8 months. But again, it was a comprehensive approach. But it was the cannabis that was the spark for me to be able to do a lot of the stuff that we are doing and that we've gotten done with patients. And of course that blends into getting them off opiates, getting them off benzos, getting them off this and that. We're even talking now, because we have a huge pediatric seizure population, they become seizure free for several years and now they want to come off their meds. I don't know about that, because the evil of good is better. So it's interesting, as the practice is growing, we're seeing very interesting cases and interesting things and interesting discussions that we're having that we clearly would have never had in the first place had we not been able to do what we do, starting with the cannabis.
And so the practice has evolved to a point where our youngest patient is 18 months old, our oldest patient is 103 years old. And a half. At her age, she says,
a half on the intake form.
Yeah, she says at her age, every month matters. But what's unique is, and what we started, and really Steve was the brainchild of this, is most patients who came to see us wanted that medical office experience. They wanted to walk out with a prescription. They wanted a doctor to tell them, when you walk into a dispensary, to have a discussion with a bud tender, also tell them you saw us and communicate via treatment plan. And so every patient that sees us walks out with a treatment plan to address long-term and acute needs of their physiology, which includes strain, consumption method, frequency, dose, and follow-up care. We typically see patients every 3 to 6 months if they're acutely ill, 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, because we also do home visits and we have a pediatric end-of-life population and a very large pediatric cancer population. So yes, there are patients that we see on a monthly basis. Actually, that's a very interesting thing that we found when we started the practice. The point of it was follow-up, get the data statistically analyzed, get things together. Yes, right? The money was in the data in terms of when you know you can help thousands of other people. But we knew it was going to be a daunting task to set out. So you had to do communicate between the dispensary and the patients, and so everybody sort of knows what everybody else is talking about. Communication in healthcare sucks, and if you improve it, you improve medical care 100-fold.
And the industry. You know, dispensaries have reached out and say, hey, we really like this treatment plan, but when you send a patient, here's something that may be beneficial for us, or which include things like, this person cannot have this dosage form because of X, Y, or Z. Or this patient is on this medication, so please avoid this strain, or this amount of X, Y, and Z. It's been awesome. Stephen hired an internal biostats guy who's looking at our first 1,000 patients, and we are analyzing a reduction of opiates, benzos, anxiolytics, sleep medications. We're looking at quality of life improvement on a 10-point scale. We're looking at sleep in terms of number of hours per night, at what they're using to provide those benefits, and the data are astounding. And so I want to save a lot of time because it is kind of a cool place to work, but I want to talk about some frequently asked questions in case these are questions you have. These are questions that patients ask us all the time. Steve, George, can I obtain a medical card if I avoid or concealing carry? The quick answer is yes, and we can talk about the specifics after. George and Steve, I came to you guys because I get care at the VA, and the VA won't allow me to have a card. I do two things then. The first thing I do is ask for a medical record. If that patient under the care of the VA has a diagnosis, a qualifying condition specifically spelled out in their records, Steve and I help them submit their applications for free. You do not need a physician certification if you have that qualifying condition in your VA records. If you have something that's close, but needs somebody to say it translates into this qualifying condition, we help veterans out. But let me make it very clear. If you're a veteran who has a qualifying condition in your record, you do not need a physician certification. You just need help submitting sometimes. Hey, Steve, George, why am I going to come see you if January 1st I can just buy recreational cannabis? Very good question, and we get it all the time. What I'm hoping will happen January 1st is that people on the fence who are at home who would like to medicate otherwise, but were too scared to ask their provider if they could get sign off, will try a recreational product. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it does, then they'll realize the benefit of obtaining a medical card, which is not just an abundance in tax savings or the ability to grow or having some protections under the law, especially when it comes to pre-employment and employment viewpoints, but or access to product, or on and on and on and on. But I hope that more people, when the adult use goes live, have the chutzpah to try, see that it works.
Who's the non-Jewish guy? You the Jewish? You were that was a switch.
Yeah. 3 of my 4 talks this week alone were in front of employment attorneys from both ends, comp, employer,
soulless.
Yeah. I will say this, I'm not an attorney, I'll disclose that. Our attorneys in the audience. But as a non-attorney, I will say the conversation had with many is that though the law is clear as mud, there is more protection by having a medical card, in their opinion, than by not, especially in places that still have zero tolerance policies at the workplace.
And recreational doesn't seem to make a budget now, like they're going to change their policy because of that. Most places will not, that we've reached out to.
We'll see what happens in the trade bill. Epidiolex. We're a huge referral practice for pediatric epilepsy. What I tell pediatric patients is, if your insurance covers it, you don't need to see me, it's okay. What we are seeing though is that insurance is not covering it because it is derived from a Schedule I substance, and the cost of that for some patients is high as $35,000 a year. And so we'll enroll them in the program, and for a cost of, I don't know, $100 a month, sometimes a little less, we'll get them the same treatment. But until there's a change in schedule, we certainly see a lot of pediatric patients. What do I do if I want to go on vacation? And is there reciprocity from state to state? Since I'm being filmed live, no. There's there's the chance of reciprocity in particular municipalities, in particular states, for card only. We still do not endorse traveling across state lines with any product. You can call ahead to see if where you're going will accept a medical card by reciprocity, but we do not endorse the travel of cannabis outside of state lines. Having said that, we're open to questions. This is where we are, in case you want to follow up and how to reach us, but we anticipate there are some questions in the audience. Oh, up here, sorry. Anyone? Anything? Yes, ma'am.
So, I'm here for a couple of different reasons, personal business as well as I'm in healthcare as well. And one of the topics that, one of the meetings that I'm going to be joining is about post-offer testing. So, just paying attention to this structure, they talked about the alpha-9 THC.
Sure.
That's where you then are able to identify whether or not that was recent consumption use.
Will you repeat the questions?
Sure. I think the question was in terms of employment and testing. And I know there's an attorney speaking today, so I don't want to take a lot from him. But what I will tell you is the speakers ahead of me at a recent presentation I did gave the impression that if things don't change during the veto session in the trade bill, that whatever you're testing for in a zero tolerance workplace it won't matter whether you're testing for one molecule or another. So for example, if I went on a road trip a week ago and consumed lawfully in a place with an adult use program and applied for a job, and my future potential employer had a pre-employment drug test policy, and I submitted to that policy by urine sample and tested positive for an inactive metabolite, which may be around for a long, long time. Right now, the law is muddy. From my understanding as a non-attorney, that employer still has the right to deny pre-employment. Now, the question comes in, what if I have a medical card? And I'm interested to see what happens in 2019, because all of the questions that I was posed were from a non-medical recreational standpoint. Is there an ADA argument? Is it that I have to be medicated to go to work to be functional? I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, this is all very interesting to me.
George, I can answer this question.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, John will be available after. He does some legal work for us, but he can.
Chuck,
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Intro yourself.
I'll stand in the middle.
Okay. So in Illinois now, if you're a medical card holder and you test positive for pre-employment drug screening, you can't be denied employment unless you are impaired at the interview, or if you're screened during employment, you have to be given the chance to show that you were not impaired at work. But purely a failed drug screening, if you have a card, is not a basis to be terminated. Now, with recreational around, I think some employers that lean conservatively are probably going to look for pretexts to try to say, well, what I would say is if you have a card, you do have legal protection, and there are attorneys that will help you enforce your rights. If you have no card and you're using recreational marijuana, the law has not played out yet because no one has started to do it. But there will be litigation claiming that because it's a legal substance like alcohol, you can't be penalized, but we won't know until the courts weigh in on it.
And I think the future of that is going to be coming up with clever ways of detection so that they know when you blow in this, okay, you did it almost 10 minutes ago, 1 year ago, but we're not, the technology is probably being assembled now.
And the kinetics of the components aren't linear like they are, let's say, for alcohol. There is no zero order kinetics that mimic complete linear metabolism of this like we see for alcohol. So yes, John's right. It's still clear as mud to me, though, because even if you are then employed, you can still maintain a zero drug-free workplace, and that's where the litigation's going to come in my humble opinion.
I have a question as well.
Sure.
Look at everybody, I'm sorry.
Shasta?
Sure.
Will that be part of the application process then? Do you hold a medical card?
I don't. So not to get into the law because I'm not an expert,
Right.
but
Yeah, he's
from
gonna
a,
speak of law.
yeah, so he'll probably speak to that, but just generally, your medical information is private and kept just like any other medical record. So, yes, sir.
From a perspective of spouse of a medical holder, has there been any study on second-hand exposure to cannabis and
Yeah.
how that might metabolize?
Sure. So, to my knowledge, in prep for a different talk, I had to sort of address this. And the question was secondhand smoke coming up positive for a test, essentially, right? Or exposure. So, probably the most used consumption method is inhalation route. And in some studies, there has been shown, and don't quote me on the percentage, but about a 20% loss secondary to streamlined smoking. So, not everything being inhaled or at the time of consumption via inhalation route escape. And there are some early data that show that depending on proximity, there may be an effect. I think the law, and good question for the next attorney too, has an ambiguous part of it that even within the rec bill states that you can't consume within a reasonable distance from, and I don't know what that, children or otherwise, but there are data to support that because of streamline effect, you may have exposure as a secondhand bystander. I don't know the literature more than that. Yes, sir.
Two questions. Could you comment a little bit on the difference between extracting the individual compounds, the different cannabinoids, and using them? For instance, I suspect the pharmaceutical industry will start to do this. We'll start to extract individual compounds and patent them and sell them, versus the entourage effect that I hear so much about. Could you talk about that a little bit? And
Could do it briefly.
why should we use the whole plant or extracts from the plant versus
Sure.
wait for Johnson & Johnson to sell me CD?
Yeah. So very, very briefly, because I think there are probably experts better than me on the topic. My day gig is treating heart failure.
Okay.
And so in the heart failure world, we know that the effect of individual drugs for the treatment of heart failure is less than the compounded effect of addressing different parts of the physiology behind it. So the reason that Steve and I use a lot of whole plant extract in treatment and use the spectrum effect is because I don't think there are enough data that have elucidated individual workings of individual components. And so what we've gotten is that just in our practice alone, RSO for us has worked way better than, let's say, a high THC edible product, or that the whole plant products tend to work better for XYZ, which is what we're looking at. So it's sort of akin to a multimodal approach because we don't generally know all of the sort of physiological happenings and how every component of the plant works on it. I think that will be elucidated later, and at that point it's a different discussion.
Corporatization of cannabis is going much faster than scientific evaluation of cannabis. It's a little bit of an issue.
Yes, sir.
So, I've been reading up on the effects of cannabis on blood brains, and they say 18 or 20. How do you guys see that as maybe a problem or something that you get checked into when it comes to like recreational, and also with taking that into account when you're trying to help somebody?
Sure. So we consider risk-benefit. I think for the adult use bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's consumption 21 or over. And so by then we assume that you have a fully developed brain. For our practice, when a patient comes in who's 1 or 2 years old that has 3 to 6 episodes of seizures a day, I think the anoxic injury to the brain probably outweighs any developmental delay from
And then put those
exposure.
medicines on top of it, and the cognitive slowing and the secondary effects are devastating, to say the least.
So I would say adult use applies to a consumer population that probably has a developed brain by then, as developed as it's going to get. And then under that, it's risk versus benefit. But the things that we see in clinic, the detriment of those presenting physiologies way outweigh what any developmental issues you may have with using cannabis. Seizures, end-of-life care, palliative care, chronic pain, we see it in kids all the time.
There are maybe 4 or 5 peer-reviewed papers that are published on cannabis. And when they start talking about a lot of that brain, it's smoking, younger age, recreational use. And here, things are, obviously, they're not smoking or inhaling anything, and we've actually introduced, for migraine, seizures, panic attacks, a way to come at it at a very acute level without having to smoke. I don't want to get into all that, but the point, I guess, is that we're starting low and slow, and the amount of product that they're using is a different effect, right? Kids using it get high. We have very different endpoints. Take this, sleep 7 hours. Take this, your anxiety went from a 10 to a 4. You know, science, not bro science.
Yeah,
science.
I think the final piece too is how much benefit are you getting? How much more benefit are you getting if I can start you on cannabis therapy, but decrease your use of other medications by 70%? How caustic are benzos and opiates and other meds that we're able to wean versus the benign effects of cannabis?
Not to mention people using, there's so much sort of quote-unquote off-label use of products where they're using it for other things. And
not off-label, but there are residual benefits, secondary benefits. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
If you currently don't have what's considered a qualified medical condition to get a medical card, but then come January, you'll be able to have access for services. Is what the type of product you will see in the mainstream dispensary is going to be the same as what's in the medical now?
So generally speaking, my understanding, and I have to reread it, is that adult rec versus medical will have differences in the amount which can be obtained and the concentration at which may vary from product to product, and a price point. I will say, and good to ask the dispensary owners because I don't know about some high concentrated products, but my understanding is those are reserved or will be reserved mostly on the medical side. But I don't want to be misquoted.
The follow-up to that is if you don't have medical issues, but you're not on the list of what qualifies, then how do you potentially work with?
I think that warrants a combo after the talk.
I think a lot of patients don't realize that they actually qualify for it, but
exactly.
There's chronic regional pain syndromes and spinal cord disease, which are all our back pain patients, surgical patients, and everything.
Yeah,
so
more people qualify than think they do.
Yes.
In speaking with physicians and other professionals, sometimes their questions are, what are the worst case scenarios or the ill effects of it? And so what would be your elevator speech to maybe address like the greening out process, the physiological response or something to that effect?
What's the nonpartisan, middle of the road, what could be good, what could be bad about it? Sort of, is that?
We hear about greening out. Taking too much of, how do you convey that information to a physician to let them know that they're not going to die from this response, but here's what it is.
Sure. So the worst presenting syndrome I've seen with cannabis, and I don't know how many thousands of patients we've seen, but this is from an inpatient side, would be cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, and that could be a discussion outside. What I would say in terms of safety and efficacy and overdoing it, underdoing it, is that it would be a conversation with the same providers who have written thousands of prescriptions for opiates, benzos, and other drugs that, if also consumed too much, would have ill effects much worse than overconsumption.
You're not going to die, you're not going to overdose, you're not going to withdraw. At worst, nothing happens, and at best, the quality of your life is impacted positively. There's almost no downside. It's the safest medicine I've ever practiced. Obviously, trauma surgery, the extent of it, but it is the safest medicine I've ever practiced. And again, what we do is, I only do for patients who come in what I would do for my own family, and my own mother or father or child. So that's how the practice is sort of run.
Yes, ma'am.
Where is medical marijuana coming from and where will the recreational marijuana coming from? What
Same place.
I'm curious about is like pesticides, chemicals.
Sure. So Illinois, and I don't want to be quoted on the specifics, but in my opinion is probably the cleanest and safe product in the United States. Grown without herbicides or pesticides, cultivated and lab tested, sealed and barcoded, and from seed to sale, you are the second person to touch it aside from the person who cultivated it.
I think it's probably as safe as a Walgreens. Go to Walgreens and they say, here's your blood pressure medicine, and you're taking what those pills are as your blood pressure medicine. It's the same thing in products that are being tested.
There is no product being come in.
How is it regulated?
The state, it's state regulated lab tested. And the licensees who currently grow and cultivate for the medical program are the same ones who will be cultivating and growing for the adult use bill. There will be no cross-line product coming in because, again, on a federal level, that can't happen. So I would consider the products maybe less abundant in terms of how much you could purchase, but from a grower point of view, just as safe, just as pure, and just as efficacious. Yes, sir.
So in your practice, with the 1,000+
And if we broke it down to his bare minimum, patients would probably need two products, one for loading of the CBD and the second one for sleep. And the only time they really, quote unquote, would need the THC, gross statement, there are underlying conditions that I'm treating very aggressively in a very different way, but grossly speaking, patients come in, they only need THC at night, and it's called sleep training. And I do it very specifically where they go and they cut things up and they go up by increments. That's why I have them use gummies, because it has milligram dosages, not brosigns. Take a rice grain, half a rice grain. You know, if your rice grains are this big, you're in trouble, right? So I think, a lot of it is just guiding people correctly to start and letting them, almost as a team approach, sort of work on their own to find things. But for what we prescribe, THC only at night, and during the daytime they load. And there's no question, by the way, my literature will pan out that loading patients with RSO specifically to load the CBD is the way to go. Whole plant extract.
When Steve says no THC, he's saying THC dominant therapy. So in the daytime, there will be a component of that therapy that has THC, not to
devoid of the psychoactive.
Low enough so that patients don't experience.
10 to 1 or 15 to 1, something. I mean, you need a little bit of THC to act as the navigational system anyway, but nothing that would be psychoactive.
Where we will use high THC therapies are for things like
seizures,
migraines, panic attacks. 10 out of 10.
That's a really good answer.
Yeah, so the main component of our daytime therapy for 90+% of patients is high CBD, low THC.
Right. Oh, and by the way, everyone knows what RSO is. You keep saying RSO.
Rick's Innocent Oil, it's a whole plant extract that is manufactured and processed to be sold as a small syringe of a sticky tarry.
No needle on it, just
no needle. And Steve said that at night it's more of a THC balanced regimen so that you can get some of that relaxation. During the daytime, it can take, our regimens will have both CBD and THC, but CBD in a higher amount.
Again, different endpoints, right? The endpoint is like sleep or anxiety, it's not high or how they feel, so sort of creep up to the right dose.
And the upcoming year when it comes to adult use, do you guys have any plans for patient populations who benefit from the use of cannabis is subject to adult necessary
Yeah, so it's a good question. And the question was, when an adult bill passes, how are we as a practice going to address adult consumers versus medical patients, sort of. One of the things that we do, I think that's pretty cool, is follow-up care. not only for patients that we've certified, but patients who come to us having been certified that want recommendations and treatment plans. We probably get, I think we have a 90% plus return rate on follow-up. And so come January 1st, Green Care Medical is still available to see anyone who wants guidance. We'll put a treatment plan together for you, whether you're a card holder or not, whether we've seen you in the past or not. It's a consultative service that we can provide to anyone. Is this helpful? Any other questions?
Okay, one more.
Sure.
So, can you talk about some of the other cannabinoids? I never say the word right.
Cannabinoids?
Cannabinoids, right? I've heard of like CBN, and I've heard that is a more of a sleep enhancer. Is that just urban wisdom? Do you have any science to back up what each of the specific CBXs might do?
Sure. I'm getting a few looks that I should wrap things up.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm more than happy to have that discussion with you at some point today. I'm here, we're also next door.
Okay, so maybe I'll see you next door.
Can find us all
Please,
day.
everybody, come find us.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Hi, thank you, George. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Lisa.
And we've got a pharmacist also that's sitting in the crowd who's been in the business for about 5 or 6 years now.
Since 2014.
Since 2014. So Luba Andrews is right here too, so I'm sure a lot of people have more questions. And Luba would also be happy to answer any questions for you. Also, the back here, we've got a box, we've got a drawing for some kind of CBD. So if you want to stop and fill out the business here, you can use the box. And And a big thanks to Hoban Law Group for supporting this event. We've got Larry Mishkin with us, who is an attorney with Hoban Law. He's the Midwest attorney, and they're one of the top cannabis law firms in the country. So Larry's going to do a brief presentation, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Very nice to be here. Nice to see such a good turnout for this. This is right around the corner, and it's coming fast, and it's good to know what you can and cannot do. This is a presentation that I put together with the assistance of my associate, John Brooks. John's a third-year law student at Vermont Law School, and someone who's very passionate about the industry and has been a big, big help to me, so thank you to John for helping me put all of this together. So, adult use is one of those things where everybody gets really excited about because the government's going to allow us to do something that it hasn't allowed us to do before. But it's really important to know what the limits of that right are and where it begins and where it ends, so you don't wind up having this result in something that you may not want it to result in. So you have to know how to protect yourself as you go forward. So I'm an attorney with the Hoban Law Group. I've been an attorney in Chicago for 30 plus years. In 2013, right after the medical statute was passed, I had a number of clients call me up and ask me what I knew about the industry. My response was, other than the fact that I went to college and a few Grateful Dead shows, I didn't know very much about it at all. And so I flew out to Seattle, Washington that fall for the second ever MJ Biz Daily Conference. They had 700 people and they were ecstatic because the year before in Denver they had 120. This past year in Las Vegas they had 25,000. So it's an industry that's growing very, very quickly, and I've been lucky enough to be able to kind of watch it grow. And really, what's been happening in Illinois, we started out with a medical program, and from there we now moved on into adult use. So some of the topics to cover today specifically are what's going to happen on January 1st of this year, where can you purchase cannabis from, what to do if you're stopped by the police, the question that everybody should be focused on, what about your job and employment, how you make a purchase, where can you consume the marijuana that you can purchase, and what's the difference between decriminalization and legalization? What's very helpful to start out, I find, is that there's a lot of people who use the terms cannabis, marijuana, and hemp interchangeably. And along with weed, pot, grass, all the other stuff, it's kind of the name that everybody just uses. They choose one or the other, but there's a big, big difference. And it's important to understand the difference. Cannabis is the main species, but then we have two variations of it, marijuana and hemp. The primary distinction between the two for legal purposes being that hemp cannot have a THC count of any greater than 0.3% of the entire plant by dry volume. Anything over that CBD level by the government is considered marijuana, even if it's such a low level still that it's not really sufficient to cause a psychoactive effect on somebody. However, hemp is legal federally, marijuana is not. This past December 2018, the 2018 Farm Bill, which was sponsored by President Trump, very explicitly states in black and white that hemp and its cannabinoids, including cannabidiol, which is CBD, are not controlled substances. So it's not like alcohol. The federal government says, from our perspective, you can do whatever you want, but the 2018 Farm Bill also says that the states are not allowed to interfere with the interstate commerce of CBD. So if you in Chicago, the states are supposed to honor that and allow it to go through, unless you go through Idaho. Idaho has kind of taken the position for right now that anything that's cannabis is cannabis, and they're not going to take the time or be bothered by trying to go through these niceties as to what is and what is not illegal. And so we've had clients who have had tanker trucks filled with CBD oil pulled over in Idaho, and although the drivers are allowed to leave, the trucks remain behind. Very recently, even here in Chicago, I had a client who had 2 packages from Seattle that contained about $10,000 worth of CBD products confiscated by the Chicago police. After 2 weeks of talking to the police and to their legal team, where I felt like I was the one who was educating them on this, and it should have been the other way around, they finally released the products to my client, so we were very happy about that. That's a positive for the Chicago police, and give them the props when it happens like that, because at least they realized that they had made a mistake and that they shouldn't be holding on to the product. So these are all going to be very, very important things. The first thing to know is this. On January 1st, marijuana is still illegal under federal law. Nothing has changed on the federal level at all. It still remains a Schedule I controlled substance and will remain there until we get a president who will be willing to take it off of Schedule I. And with all due respect to whatever your political affiliation might be, we have not had a Republican or Democratic president in the last 20 years who's shown any real indication to changing this characterization and classification of marijuana. When you understand the background of it and everything else, it gets a little suspicious. It's a Schedule I controlled substance. This is under the Controlled Substances Act. It was created by the Nixon administration in the early 1970s. Marijuana is listed on Schedule I along with heroin and LSD as the most dangerous drugs. Anything on Schedule I, the government is saying not only is it illegal, it has no recognized medical use of any kind. So there's no good purpose for it at all, period. Cocaine is on Schedule II because cocaine does in fact, at least at one point, had a medically recognized purpose. Dentists might say it still does. So you're really talking about getting something that's rated as being worse than cocaine and as bad as some other drugs that we really think of as being bad. The unfortunate part about this is that when you look at the Schedule I factors, really none of them seem to apply. It's a substance that has a high potential for abuse. The drug or other substance has no currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States, and then in the United States part it becomes very important. And there is a lack of accepted safety for use of the drug or other substance under medical supervision. The United States sits here and says there's no known medical testing on patients and things like that that we can use to justify that marijuana is safe and has medical efficacy, besides the fact that there's many generations of anecdotal evidence on which they could rely. In the country of Israel, there's a researcher named Raphael Mishkin, who back in the late 1950s and early 1960s decided that he wanted to study marijuana and what it was made of and what medical benefits it did or did not have. They were very interested in the effects of THC as the Israeli soldiers were picking up hashish from a lot of the Arabs, and so there was the question of what is this stuff and what should we do with it. And in 1964-65, Dr. Mishkin became the first person in the world to isolate CBD and THC. So as early as 1965, he recognized the existence of CBD. You know, if I ask most people in this room to raise their hands, you know, if anybody even had heard of CBD more than 5 years ago, the answer is probably no. It's something that everybody sees as this modern-day creation, when in fact the Israeli government has known about it, and more importantly, they've had 50 years of patient testing and medical records. So in fact, there is accepted, or at least accepted in that country, medical testing that's been done and it has established the medical efficacy of medical cannabis, as well as debunked a lot of the myths that constantly surround it in terms of the problems and the reasons why people don't want it to be available. So we've already talked about other examples of drugs that are listed on Schedule 1. This is where the government has put marijuana, and they've created the interesting catch-22 that it's on Schedule 1 because we don't really know very much about it having any medical properties, but they can't test it because it's on Schedule 1. So that'll make your head hurt for a minute. More drugs, and then this is something that people, I think, are misunderstanding. Come January 1st, and this is very important, marijuana is still illegal under federal law. We are not legalizing marijuana in Illinois. We are creating adult use. There's a big difference. On January 1, you will not be allowed to walk down the street openly smoking marijuana. There is no public consumption of marijuana. You can't buy it and go to a Cubs game, although a lot of people obviously do. But these are the rules, and you need to know them. You can't buy marijuana from anywhere or anybody who is not a state licensed adult use dispensary. Or if you're a medical patient with a card, you can still go to your medical shop and get your marijuana there. But this is important. What they've done is they've said that this activity is illegal unless you're 21 years of age or older with proper ID, unless you've purchased your marijuana from a properly licensed dispensary, so long as you have not exceeded the personal limit of basically 1 ounce. I think they have it at 30 grams, but that comes out to just a little bit more than 1 ounce of total THC product on your possession, so long as it's still in the original packaging in which you purchased it, and so long as you're taking it back to your house or any other private residence with the owner's permission. If you live in an apartment, the owner is the landlord. You need to have the landlord's permission. It's not enough for you to say, I'm renting here, it's okay for me to smoke and to do it. That doesn't satisfy under the law. And for those of you that do have your own homes or have friends who own homes, you can smoke there, however, you must be out of sight of the street or your neighbors. So if this doesn't sound suspiciously like when we were all in high school and had to go into the basement so nobody would see us, in fact, that's exactly what they're doing. But you need to know this. Now, I'm not predicting that police officers are going to go around arresting everybody in sight if they see them smoking outside, but they'll probably give warnings, and it's just something that you do need to know that on January 1, marijuana is not legal in this state. As long as you comply with the rules of adult use, you're not considered to be breaking the law. You know, maybe that's a lawyer's distinction, but it's a very important distinction, and it's there to make sure that people don't abuse the right that adult use gives you to go out and be able to purchase marijuana products and to consume them responsibly and privately. When something is legalized, what we're doing is lifting or abolishing the laws that are banning the possession of personal use of marijuana. More importantly, legalization allows the federal government to regulate and tax marijuana use and sales. So when we have a legal system, all the governments get to collect their taxes on it. And we find that that includes the United States government. And for anyone out here who is thinking at all about the possibility of trying to go for a dispensary license, which are going to be currently, the license applications are available. They're due by January 2nd. If you're going to do it, go talk to an accountant first. You need to know and understand what the impact of the government taxing your marijuana is and what the limits are. There's something in the tax code that's section 280E, 280 capital E. If you Google it and type cannabis next to it, hit go, you'll get more information than you can possibly ever read. It's going to help you fall asleep. However, it's very, very important if you're going to own a dispensary, because 280E says that any business that is engaged in the retail sale dispensaries of a Schedule 1 marijuana or Schedule 2 cocaine controlled substance may not deduct ordinary business expenses. If you own a dispensary, you cannot deduct your salaries, you cannot deduct your rent, you cannot deduct anything except the cost of goods that are being sold. And there's a long line now of case law that kind of defines a little bit better what the borders of that cost of goods sold are. In other words, what the IRS will accept as a deductible expense, and it's not really very much. So people need to know that, and you need to talk to an accountant who understands 280E. If you don't, any financial model will not be accurate, and any investor will be very unhappy that either you didn't tell them about 280E or that you didn't even know about it. And if they don't get a return on their money that they anticipate because they didn't take 280E into account, that can create a problem as well. So it's very important to know what the government does and how they handle this, and 280E is something that you have to keep in mind if you're operating a dispensary. Decriminalization is a little bit different. This is when they just loosen the criminal penalties imposed for personal marijuana use, even though it still remains illegal. So a good example is that in the city of Chicago, if you're arrested by the police and if you're in possession of, I think it's 14 grams or less, which is just a little bit more than a half an ounce, if I do my math right, you will not be arrested. You'll be given a citation, and as long as you pay your citation on time, not unlike a parking ticket, and don't make this a regular habit, it doesn't show up on your record, you don't have to go to court, you don't have to worry about jail time, you don't have to go to drug school, or any of that other stuff that they have out there. It's a big, big benefit for parents whose kids go to college in the city, and because the kids are going to go outside, they are going to smoke from time to time, and if they get caught, it's better not to have an entire future ruined, and so we're very happy about that. But again, the key thing to note about decriminalization is that it's not changing the overall legal nature of the product in any way. It's just changing the rules as to when you've crossed the line, such that law enforcement will get involved and potentially have a problem for you. So everybody wants to know, how can this work if every time you go to a dispensary to make a purchase of marijuana, you are breaking federal law? Even though state law says it's quite all right, go ahead. We have something called the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution, and what that says is that normally federal law will prevail. There's lots of other instances that we can think of where federal law can prevail. In this instance, what we've done, what the states have done, and this is really the amazing thing about it, is they've kind of done a little experiment in civics that, you know, maybe our kids will all be studying about 20 years from now, and they said, the heck with the federal government, we're not going to sit around and wait for them. We don't see any problem with this. California and Colorado led the way, and the official legal first medical and then adult use cannabis industries were born. And the states had to really decide what they were going to do with them, and California and Colorado made the decision that there was no way to ever get their arms around it and stop it completely. So they flipped to the other side and said, we're going to create rules. If you follow the rules, then you're good to go. It took a long time for the federal government to get on board with this. And a lot of people don't know or remember, but even in President Obama's enforcers of federal marijuana law against a number of states that were developing programs. Now, to his credit, these tended to be states where there were no rules at all, and it really was kind of a Wild West situation. So the problem was kind of formally addressed at the end of 2013. The voters in Colorado and in Washington had voted that on January 1 of 2014, they were going to go to adult use and be the first two states ever to have adult use. So the governors of those two states and their state's attorneys write a letter to the Obama Justice Department and say, hey, what's going to happen on January 1st or 2nd or 3rd? Are you guys going to come swooping into our state and start arresting everybody and cause real problems? Because if you are, then we'd like to know about it now. And so James Cole, who was the Assistant Attorney General at the time working for Eric Holder, who was Barack Obama's Attorney General then, sat down and drafted up something called the Cole Memorandum, C-O-L-E. Again, if you Google Cole Memorandum in cannabis, it'll come up and you can read all about it. The short version is that the federal government said, unofficially, but in an official way, as long as you are a state that has a official, we will stay out and we'll let you run your business. And then they listed a number of what they call federal enforcement priorities, the types of things that will certainly bring them into the state. And many of them are obvious. If you're selling to minors, if you're selling to the black market, if you're selling across state lines, any of those kind of things will do it. And the federal government was very clear about that. But again, to their credit, They have since then, for the most part, stayed out of the states. Not only have they stayed out, but we saw the Rohrabacher Farr Amendment passed in 2012. I think it was the first. Rohrabacher is a Republican from California. Obviously, California has a very strong interest in the cannabis industry. And the Rohrabacher Farr Amendment, basically, it was an amendment to the federal appropriations bill that came out every year, and it addressed the DEA. They told the DEA, you may not use any of the money that Congress is appropriating to you to go in essence, cause trouble in states that are covered under the Cole Memorandum, that otherwise the federal government would stay out of, and you can't do it. DEA didn't always listen, and sometimes they would go in anyway. But this is what the Cole Memorandum said, and this is what it did. And not only did it allow those two adult use markets to go forward, but I think a lot of people give the Cole Memorandum the credit for Big Mike finally being comfortable to come into the cannabis space and help fund businesses and programs because they heard the federal government say, we're just not really all that interested in coming in and disrupting these state programs. A year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, Jeff Sessions, who we all were very concerned about at the time Donald Trump was elected and appointed him as Attorney General, came out 3 days after California's adult use program kicked in and made a big splashy announcement that the Cole Memorandum was off the table and that nobody should rely on it anymore and that it was no longer going to be a barrier to the federal government enforcing federal law. And predictably, all of the publicly traded cannabis stocks immediately dropped by 50% or more, and just as predictably, Sessions did absolutely nothing because he had every legal right prior to that time to do anything he wanted. The Cole Memorandum was not a law cast in stone. It was a recommendation to the U.S. Attorneys General around the country that they shouldn't be prosecuting and going after cannabis sales and cannabis manufacturing that were all done as part of a state licensed operation. So, in fact, the federal government really, if it was ever going to take a swing at the industry right now, would have been that time. William Barr has kept it pretty close to the vest exactly how he feels about it, but he's been very vocal on other issues, and I don't think that he's the kind of guy who would hold back if he felt it was an industry that needed to be cleaned up in the way that Mr. Sessions did. So the advice that we're giving our clients right now on the federal level is everything can change by tomorrow morning or even by the time I'm done talking. But for right now, we don't see any problems at the federal level as long as, again, you're complying with state and federal rules. Federal rules include crossing state lines. If you are in a state that has legal adult use, and if you are traveling to a state that has legal adult use, and if you buy your marijuana in the first state and take it to the second state, you have just broken the law of the state you left, the state you've entered, and the federal government. You cannot take it across state lines. People do, and it happens a lot. And a lot of adult use dispensaries, I think, ultimately factor that in, especially if they look for locations that are close to borders, that they will get business from other states. But we tell all of our clients who are going to do that, you need to have signs up that say it's illegal, to cross the state line with anything you purchase in the store. We don't support it, we don't allow it, and if we find out that you've been doing it, we will prohibit you from making any further purchases in this store. But you need to know this, and one of the nice things about having adult use in Illinois is that people don't have to fly to Colorado and buy product and figure out a way to try to bring it back home and hope that it won't be caught or that it won't be confiscated. Again, the federal government has kind of given us a signal that they don't really care all that much. TSA has come right out and said that it's not an issue that they focus on and they look for, and they basically follow the custom of the jurisdiction in which you're located. So in Los Angeles, LAX made a big point of coming out and saying that they've told TSA up to an ounce of marijuana, they don't even want to know about it, just let the person get on the plane and fly out. Other states like Colorado have made it very clear that they will search for THC products, and if you have them, they will confiscate them, and they'll turn the matter over to the Denver police for its consideration as to what it wants to do. So the legal advice is do not travel with it. If you're going to a state that has adult use, now coming to Illinois, you'll have that option. If you live here, you'll have it. Take advantage of what's being given to you, support the local participants in the program, and just eliminate one area where you could be crossing a line and getting yourself into trouble. the first year after the bill has been passed, has the right to opt out. And all they need to do is, if they have a city council or anything like that, just have a simple vote of the city council and say, we're opting out and we are not going to allow any adult use marijuana facilities in our village. We don't want cultivation, we don't want processing, we really don't want dispensaries, and they'll give you a lot of reasons why they don't. I don't agree with any of them, but that's not a debate for today. It's just a fact. If you go and look up most of the arguments that they make as to why they should opt out, most of them have no basis and don't really stand up to scrutiny. Nevertheless, in the interest of being, good and nice neighbors to everybody, it is important to make sure that there is a well-regulated industry, that we do send the message that this is not about selling to children, this is not about selling to people who shouldn't have marijuana in their possession. This is no different than any other industry that provides an intoxicant. We're an intoxicant society. If you don't believe me, turn on a football game and count the number of beer commercials you see in the first minute and a half. You can't have a Super Bowl without every beer company, and now the hard liquor companies can advertise on TV as well. I would make an argument that we're crazy to push the sale of one over the sale of the other when we know that the other is much safer than the first one. But nevertheless, that's the way that we're working as a society right now. And so the other big part about adult use that becomes important is that it helps us normalize cannabis use in the community so that people become accepting of the fact that it's around. In Colorado, if you go to Denver and you walk down the pedestrian mall, I think it's 16th Street, they have buses that run up and down it, and they have all sorts of stores, and people go there to do their daily shopping, and they'll go to the grocery store, and they'll go to get their hair cut, and they'll go to pick up their laundry, and they'll go to the dispensary, and then they'll go to the bank, and then they'll go home. And nobody hangs out outside the dispensary with their eyes pressed against the glass, desperately hoping that somebody will give them a joint or something like that. It doesn't happen. And in the states that have had adult use, teenage smoking has gone down, which is something that a lot of people say is counterintuitive to what would be expected. But this is what the studies are showing. DUIs and involvement in fatalities have all gone down. But be careful of groups that like to take statistics and distort them. What you'll hear is that in Colorado, the number of fatal car accidents where one of the drivers tested positive for THC has spiked. And of course, the response to that is, duh, what did you expect? You're selling marijuana to the population, they're buying it, they're smoking it, it stays in their system for 30 days. The real question is not whether or not they test positive for THC. The question is how long ago did they smoke the THC, and is it still producing a psychoactive effect? In other words, presence versus impairment. It's always going to be present. How can we determine whether or not the person is impaired? It's going to have important implications for employment law as well, because don't forget that it's still illegal. You have no right to smoke marijuana. If you work for an employer who has a zero tolerance policy for drugs of any kind, and you get tested on January 3rd and you test positive, you could lose your job if the employer takes that position. My comments back to the employer is you better be careful, because if you have 20 employees and 18 of them test positive because they like to smoke marijuana, that could be a really difficult policy to enforce on your business. So I think there'll eventually be an equilibrium that'll come to play here. But there are tests that are available. They're a little more expensive and they require a blood draw. And they look at the metabolites in the blood, and based on that, they can tell whether or not the metabolites are still in a state that are producing a psychoactive effect. The metabolites metabolize within 4 to 6 hours after you stop smoking. So it's very, very safe, I think, to say that even within 24 hours of time, it cannot reasonably be said that marijuana that you had consumed 24 hours before is still having a psychoactive effect on you and impairing you in any way. So these are things to keep in mind. There is no employment right to smoke marijuana. Employers, you should sit down and think about what you want to do with this. Employees, before you do it, you should ask your employers what their position is going to be on this, so you don't find yourself on the wrong end of well, I went to a friend's house last night and he purchased a legal product and we used it, and now I'm showing up for work and my employer is handing me a plastic cup. What do I do? It's always good to address these issues. If you have any questions, you should consult with attorneys before you do it, because it could affect your legal rights, and you need to understand what you can and cannot do. Another thing that's very important, you cannot purchase for somebody who's under the age of 21. You cannot be the hip, cool aunt or uncle or cousin or older sibling or, best friend's brother or whatever you want to be for somebody who's under the age. Everybody tells stories about how they went down to the liquor store and found some nice adult who was happy to take their money and go in and buy them something. Can't do it here. You just can't do it, because if you do it, you can be arrested. You're breaking the law if you purchase marijuana for anyone under the age of 21. Just like in the medical program before adult use kicks in, so over these next few weeks, if you have a medical marijuana card, you go in and you make a purchase, and that purchase is for someone who is not an otherwise licensed Illinois medical marijuana patient, you are breaking the law. It's important to understand that. So these are going to be the rules that are going to kick in terms of what you can purchase as a 21 years age or older adult in Illinois. If you come from out of state, the limits are going to be less, and that's to avoid people simply crossing the border and stocking up. This is purchases at one time. If you go to the next dispensary down the street, they're not going to know that you just purchased an ounce of marijuana, so they won't stop you from making a purchase. So theoretically, you could go and buy 4 or 5 or 6 ounces, but if you get pulled over by the police in that situation, you're going to have a problem on your hands, because adult use, the presumption that you're not breaking the law ends when you're in possession of more than 30 grams of marijuana. So you might think that you're being clever by getting around the system in terms of how much you purchase, but if you get caught with it, you're setting yourself up for a real problem. So you need to be very careful about that as well. So if the police do stop you when you're transporting it, because this is the questions we get asked all the time, okay, I buy it here, I live there, I've got to walk, I've got to take the bus, I've got to take the train, I'm going to drive my car, and guess what? This stuff really smells, it's really strong. Marijuana has a really strong, you get on the CTA and everybody knows what's going on. If you get pulled over by a police officer, because that's the time you inadvertently run a stop sign, the cop is going to stick his or her nose in the car and they're going to smell it right away. Now the law technically says that mere possession should not be enough for probable cause, and I say, well, that's a wonderful theory. It's not the theory that you're going to find with your typical Chicago police officer. So if they smell it and they can detect it and you say, well, I just purchased it, they're going to say, let's take a look around. So if you're one of those people who throws your receipts away, don't. Put it in the bag, keep everything wrapped up. Do not open it outside the dispensary to take a look at it and see what it is. If you get home and you open it and it looks like they short you, turn around and drive back. But you don't want to open it up when you're driving home, because if you get pulled over with it, you can show them the receipt, they see how much you purchased, it's all still in the bag, unopened, and then in that instance, the law does say that they no longer have probable cause for anything because you have not broken. Not sufficient for them to say, okay, by the way, let me look in your trunk. It's just like Nancy Reagan taught us, just say no. Just say no. Everybody says, well, no, the answer is no, you don't have a right to search my, well, we're going to go get a police dog, go get one. I'll wait here, and if it takes too long, that's going to be a problem for you later. The reason why you do that is because the minute you consent to them searching your vehicle, anything they find in your vehicle can now be used against you. If they conduct a search and they find something, the first thing a criminal defense attorney is going to ask you is, did you consent to them searching your vehicle? If you say to the attorney, I just said no, he or she is going to love you because you've just made it very possible for them to now come in and argue a defense for you that has a chance of succeeding. So keep that in mind. Just because you're cooperating and you're showing them, look, I purchased these 2 eighths, and here they are, and here's the receipt that shows that I did it. As you can see, officer, the safety seal is still in place, and I haven't smoked it. Great. Can I look at your trunk? No. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. I can't promise you it'll go that smoothly, but in theory it should. And that's really the way that it should be. So again, we're just talking about the amount that you're carrying around. If you really have gone around and wound up purchasing 3 or 4 or 5 ounces, you could be setting yourself up for a real problem, because the criminal laws are always based on the amount that you have with you. I will also tell you that if you are licensed to carry a firearm, you need to be very careful about taking your firearms into a dispensary. And if you own a dispensary, you want to make sure that you have a sign that says no firearms. This is not a gun control argument. It is an argument because one of the factors under the Cole memorandum that the federal government relies upon in determining whether or not they need to come in is whether or not there's been any violence or any violent weapons used during the purchase. So if you're in a dispensary, people are buying marijuana, and somebody else comes in and says, I'm going to rob all of you, and some wonderful citizen says, no, you're not, and pulls out his or her gun and shoots the person. We've just had a discharge of a weapon in a dispensary while marijuana was being sold. It's the worst possible thing that could happen to everybody. So it's not something that you want to do. If you're transporting marijuana legally under the law, because you follow all of the rules, ideally you don't want to have a gun sitting on the seat next to you. Police officers will see that, they'll see the marijuana, and now they're going to look at it very, very differently. And it's not a question of whether or not you can ultimately get off hook. It's a question of, do you want to be arrested and have your grandmother see your picture in the local newspaper where they publish the photos of everyone who got arrested the night before? So it's just good common sense. And these are the things that you need to keep in mind. Guns are heavily regulated, marijuana is heavily regulated. They do not go together very well. So we said, where can you consume the cannabis? You can consume it in your home if you're outside of the view from your neighbor. So keep that in mind, because if you have a nosy neighbor who's going to pick up the phone and call the police and say, the guy next door is smoking marijuana and ruining my children in the neighborhood, that nosy neighbor can cause problems for you. So your garage, your inside of your house, anywhere you can find a space to do it, or become friends with your neighbors. If you're renting, you do need to have permission from your landlord. If the landlord's like, yeah, hey man, no problem, go right ahead, then draw up something that says, hey man, yeah, no problem, go right ahead, and ask him to sign it, and put a date on there, so that later on, when they come in and say, we never gave you permission to smoke marijuana, because their bank is there to foreclose on them, because one of the terms of their mortgage is they're not allowed to have marijuana on their property, and they forgot about that when they told you you couldn't smoke on the property. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be renting, I tell people, don't try to hide it from your landlord, because then they're going to get upset. They will come in and they could try to kick you out. Negotiate into the lease right up front. You know, can I smoke? If they say no smoking, can I vape? Can I have edibles in my refrigerator? You know, and just be honest with them. And if they say no, 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 then you might want to consider looking for another location. If you're living in a condominium association, or you live in a house that has a homeowners association, there's a lot of speculation going on right now about whether or not the board of directors of the condominium or the homeowners association can pass a bylaw that prohibits cannabis. Again, it's a matter of somebody coming to them and saying, look, I have a mortgage on your house. I don't want anybody else nearby smoking marijuana. I don't want the federal government to come in and say there's marijuana being run out of this neighborhood. We're grabbing all of the houses, and the bank has just lost its security for $500,000. So they stand on these things very strongly, and so it's not uncommon for condo and homeowner associations to debate this issue and ultimately to try to pass rules saying, so now it's a property that you do own and you're still being told that you can't smoke it, but so far the courts have not told the associations that they can't do it. Cannabis at work, I would say, is a big no-no, unless you happen to have an employer who is open to that kind of thing and has expressly told you that you can. It's always helpful when the employer joins in. But again, going to work and saying, it's lunchtime, I'm going to go outside, and we don't have 3 joint lunches, like 3 martini lunches. It's just not a good idea. You're going to come back smelling like cannabis. You're going to be high, you're not going to be able to get everything done that you have to do, and then that's going to lead to the type of employment problems that we were concerned about. Okay, big question. I've got a medical card, I have to pay money to the state, I have to pretend like I have some illness that I may not really have. Do I really want to keep my medical card, and do I really need it because on January 1 there's going to be adult use? Absolutely, positively, yes. Keep that medical card. The numbers of patients in Illinois, since they announced adult use, has skyrocketed because people are very, very smart and very aware of what they've seen in other states, and what's going to happen in Illinois is if you have a medical card, you will not have to pay excise tax on your purchases. The excise taxes are going to be big. They can be as much as 15 to 25% in addition to the price that's going to be charged, depending on the THC content of what it is that you're purchasing. That's a huge amount of money in addition to what you're already paying. So for some people, having a medical card, that's a great way to avoid having to pay the tax. All of the dispensaries are taking the position that there will be a separate supply of marijuana for their medical patients. because everyone expects the adult use demand to be great and for there to be a lot of dispensaries to be selling out very quickly. But the idea is that there are some people who do actually rely on this as a medicine and who will be harmed if it's not available to them. So if you are a medical patient, I would strongly advise you to go talk to the manager of the dispensary that you use and have a conversation with him or her about what their policy is going to be on this issue. Is there going to be a separate medical supply? Is there going to be a separate line for medical patients so you don't have to wait outside in the freezing cold in lines that go around the block like we see on TV in every town when they first go to adult use? But find out about that in advance, and if your manager won't tell you, if they say they're not going to do it, there's a means by which you can switch dispensaries for your medical card. Go find one that will and switch your card. You'll be a lot happier. It'll be a lot better. If you are a medical patient, as of January 1st, you can grow up to 5 plants in your house in a room that is secure and not visible from the street. Again, nobody wants to be driving by down the street and see a house in the little solarium room right off the living room, and my God, look at those huge cannabis plants in there. They're just not interested in that for crime reasons and other things, so you have to be very careful where you grow it. Adult use is not allowing the general adult population to do so. It was discussed and was ultimately voted down for a variety of reasons. Everybody has their feelings one way or another on that. My feelings, I think, can best be summed up by saying that I'm in my mid-50s for my entire life. You can go down to the local hobby shop and buy a beer-making kit, and I don't think that Anheuser-Busch has ever had one sleepless night worrying that they're losing their business to home beer makers. But nevertheless, if you are a patient, you can grow. If you are not a patient, you cannot grow. If you're a patient, you cannot assign your grow rights to other people, so you can't go around and collect up everybody and say, now I can grow 20 plants. It's per household and that's it. But it is a right that you will have if you're a patient. So it is a very good idea to keep your patient card if you have that opportunity. And again, your job, they can continue to test you, and if you test positive, they can fire you. This has already been ruled upon by the courts. It might change over time, but nobody wants to be the person that has to become the test case. So in summary, I think what I just want to say is be smart, understand the law. If you have any questions, call an attorney before you do something. That way you'll enjoy adult use. Everybody can continue to enjoy it. We create a positive impact on society, and we can move beyond all of the reefer madness nonsense that we're still living with. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. If it's really CBD.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, if you get pulled over by the police and if it's marijuana or CBD and they smell something, what should you do? It's a good question, and again, it falls on the distinction of marijuana and hemp. For those who are CBD fans, you know that you go into your local CBD store and you can now buy CBD flower. And it actually looks like a bud of marijuana, so it's understandable that it might be confused for being marijuana, but it is legal. So if you're smoking CBD flower and you get pulled over by the police, the first thing you should tell the police is, what you smell is CBD flower, here's the container, it's legal. Doesn't mean the police officer is going to believe you. It doesn't mean they have to believe you at that stage. But you want to go on record right away as telling them what it is, so somebody doesn't come back later and say, no, you were smoking marijuana at the time, you must have swapped it out. If you get pulled over and you're smoking marijuana, and you actually are, and it's out, and the cop doesn't have to do a lot of searching to find it, then, like I said before, you just say no. You have legal rights. You do not have to answer questions. The Miranda warning should be given, and those rights still apply. And you call an attorney, and they will help you in that situation.
Question. Going back to the show today, does it give the officer practice certain home because this is my officer said, hey, I'm thinking the neighbor's next door or something?
The question is, if your neighbor turns you in for smoking adult use marijuana, the police show up, what can or can't they do? Good question. The short answer is that if you can establish for the police at the door that you purchased the marijuana from an adult use dispensary, if you're a patient, you can show them your medical card and say, However, there are cases where the police say, that's fine, we're going to come in and take a look around anyway. We want to make sure that you're not in excess of your personal limit. We want to make sure that there aren't kids in there that are smoking. We want to make sure of a lot of other things. In that situation, you can say no to the police if they don't have a search warrant. And they do have to go back and they do have to get a search warrant as long as they can't establish that there's somebody inside who has the risk of imminent harm. But, you know, it does kind of beg the question a little bit about, they will go and get a warrant and they will come back and they will go searching through your house. So I think that the idea is to kind of, you know, take stock of what you have and what you don't have. If you are within the limits of everything, you know, there's really nothing wrong with saying that, look, you search my house and you get a warrant, but I'm going to tell you right now, I do not have more than an ounce of marijuana on me, and I have the receipts that show where I purchased this marijuana. So, you know, under the law, I haven't done anything wrong or illegal. You know, at that point, if, you know, you're not going to get anything out of arguing with a police officer. If they're going to arrest you, they're going to arrest you. But, you know, now you can tell your attorney or anyone you talk to, hey, right from the moment I got pulled over, I was telling this guy what it was. You're creating a record of what was happening.
Do you think four lockers in our environment to get reviewed now that four lockers not there?
Will Rohrbacher's get renewed?
Just yes.
Yes. John says yes, so I'm going with yes. I think it's an important thing because even with adult use, we still have situations where you can be a legal farmer, somebody, whether it's adult use or medical, and you're still growing within the limits of what you're allowed to grow. And, you know, there's no, the federal government has determined in a bipartisan House, keep in mind, this is really amazing, right? They can't agree on what day of the week it is, but they all came together and they had no problem passing this bill and renewing it year after year. And that's because Democrats and Republicans like to get high. And they all have a vested interest in it one way or another. And it's very true. You know, for some people it becomes a political football and, you know, everybody has to judge that, you know, on their own merit. But typically and traditionally, cannabis support has come from both sides of the aisles, and it's something that even, you know, if you're on the left wing, the hard right wing opinions, people typically don't get on the air and rail against marijuana and its harms or its dangers. Instead, you get Columbine Maureen Dowd because she ate a whole edible and had a bad experience on it, and, you know, now wants to say beware, beware, instead of I just wasn't careful and didn't follow the rules when I bought an edible. So again, it all comes down to personal responsibility, which is the hallmark of adult use. Marijuana is very strong and can be. It's not what you remember from high school. And if you smoke too much of it, if you eat an entire edible that has 100 milligrams, or you drink a bottle of infused product, you might find yourself a little high. If you are, then you need to go, you know, sit down and find somebody who you like to talk to and eat some ice cream.
You can go for another 10 minutes. We're running a little bit late on the panel.
Larry, the appropriation, right? The appropriation. So, everybody, I'm John.
Hold it
By the way,
close.
I am from Chicago. I just go to school in Vermont. This is where I plan to practice law. Basically, what's happened is a representative from Oregon, I cannot pronounce his name, I just call him Goober. What he did is in the appropriations rider, he said, we will not, as a Congress, we will not designate any funds to the Department of Justice to go after any state where a legitimate recreational marijuana program is in place. Now, why is that important? It passed the House because of obvious reasons. Mitch McConnell's not really thinking about it right now. But at the end of this month or next month, the federal government runs out of money, and they have to take up that appropriations right. And there are things in there, like he said, that both Republicans and Democrats want. I don't trust anything this government says until it happens. But if that passes, it will ensure more protections for the states that have a legitimate program. So it will give you some type of peace of mind. And it's a discussion that me and Larry have a lot of, because in this place, I'm from the south side of Chicago. I grew up in Englewood. A police officer stopping me and Larry is going to be two very different situations. And this is something I try to explain to people, because I've spoken to maybe 30 cops, CPD, suburban cops, and everything, and I've said, what are you going to do on January 1st? And I've gotten the same answer every time. We have no idea.
And of course, that's very, very dangerous, because nobody wants to be a target to see. About the building, I just want to mention really fast, what's really important about it is the social equity component. And there's a few different parts to social equity. The first part, I think everybody generally agrees with. For people who have misdemeanor and class 4 felonies, did not involve a violent weapon, 100,000 people, or 800,000 convictions, I should say. So people who have had to carry around the stigma and low-level marijuana conviction their whole life are soon going to be free of that. And there is different ways to make that happen. John has been working with groups helping people apply for expungement. If you think you have something like that, feel free to call us, and we're happy to help you, because it's a right you need to take advantage of. The other part of social equity is that we are going to, the state is going to make licenses more available to qualify as social equity applicants, to give them an opportunity to become involved in this program and for the right reasons. How you qualify for social equity is, of course, subject to statute and rule. Some people agree with it, some people don't. But generally speaking, if you are going to own 51 or more % of the entity, including control of the operation of the business, and you have lived 5 of your last 10 years in a neighborhood that qualifies for social equity status, when you go online, they have it by zip code now. They have a map with the zip codes colored in that do qualify. Or if you have been a victim of the war on drugs, meaning that you were arrested for one of these crimes that are available for expungement, and 51% of the business, then you can qualify as social equity. The third way is for an individual who doesn't come from one of these neighborhoods, who's never been arrested. If they employ 10 or more individuals, and at least 6 or 51% of those individuals would otherwise qualify as social equity under one of the first 2 categories, then that individual can also get social equity status. Social equity is important because it gives the applicant a 50-point bonus. I think it's fair to say that most applicants will be trying to take advantage of it, and if you don't have any social equity ability in your application, you may find that in and of itself is enough to cause you to fall short. But you have to be careful with it. They're going to be policing it very, very carefully.
One more.
Dispensary owner, and once the marijuana is sold, and I would argue to an adult holder who's shown you proper ID, and you haven't sold them in excess of 1 ounce of marijuana or THC. They've been taken, they've left your store, no longer your responsibility. Now, that's not to say that if that person smokes the marijuana and then gets in their car and drives a school bus full of kids off the road in a big fiery crash, and everybody sees it and thinks it's worse than that, they're not going to turn around and try and sue one way or another. It will happen in marijuana. Marijuana is going to become legal, just like any other industry. It's got pluses and minuses for all sorts of things. So but that outside the control of the law will not penalize you and say like you could be arrested in that situation. Okay, if anybody else has any questions, I'm happy to answer them over on the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Next door to Emporium, so if you have additional questions for him, like he said, he's happy to answer them. Feel free to go next door. We'll be starting the social equity panel in about 10 minutes. I apologize, we're running a few minutes behind on that, some traffic issues. So if you are going to stay, there's food for sale next door, the bar is open, and we've got a few special guests who wants to raise their hand. Lula Adams in the back is a pharmacist who's been in the industry for 6 years. She's available for questions. Anyone else in the industry who wants to raise their hand so people know they can come and ask questions of you? And we've got Rick from Greenhouse Grassroots here too. We'll be happy to answer questions. And we've got a lot next door with the expo. There's food over there.
Hello? Hello?
Try and use my phone. It can pick up my phone too.
Oh, that's use your phone.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say.
Your phone is gonna be out. It's not gonna be. That's gonna be a lot better.
Yeah.
And then it's not gonna pick up the entire replay.
Right. Versus.
do they have bottles?
I don't know.
Do you have bottles of water back there?
I do not.
They're eco-friendly.
I have water down here. I can also pour you some right here as well.
Would you mind? That'd be great. Thank you.
Ice?
No. Actually, sorry. Yes, I will. If it's just tap water, yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks.
I should have just gotten it. I made it on time. I'm sorry. I'll send it, but we're kind of like, in the beginning, we'll do intros, and around the intros, we're going to get the name, organization. Alright, that'll get everybody like, and then we'll go into the questions, and then we'll be Q&A.
What's up, Victoria? Yeah.
Right up to your mouth. If it's here, it's not going to go on the live recording.
Essentially, this is supposed to be integrated describe that. That's one of the two Chicago seems about that something they may not know what is actual.
And I've got little swag bags for you guys after.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So if you want to take your seat and just quiet down again, we'll call the panel. I just want to introduce Richard Wallace to you. Richard, if you want to come up. Richard is the founder of Equity and Transformation, and he's going to be moderating the panel. So I'm going to pass the mic to him and let Richard take it from there. We've got some fabulous panelists. Looking forward to it.
Hello, everybody. I'm from the west side, so when I say hello, everybody says hello back. Hello, everybody. All right, welcome to Get Into Equity. My name is Richard Wallace. I'm the founder of Equity and Transformation, aka EAT. We organize Black informal workers on the west side of Chicago. We played a large role in the equity measures that were established in House Bill 1438. So shout out to that. Through that, a few things happened, right? One, we have a social equity applicant designation. Social equity applicants are individuals that come from DIA, right? Disproportionately impacted areas in the city of Chicago. Along with that, 50% of their fees are cut. Along with that, there's a points qualifier where they get 65 points for being a social equity applicant. They're also eligible for low interest loans to the social equity applicant, as a social equity applicant. So there's a number of things, a number of provisions that took place, and it was a long fight, a long journey to actually get to an equitable policy. Right now in the city of Chicago, Chicago is being paraded as having the most equity-centric policy in the nation. So shout out to Chicago for that. And that didn't happen because the industry necessarily wanted to, right? That happened because the people, this is a democracy, they stood up and they said, these are the changes that we want to see in this policy. And a lot of lifting came to pass. So we're going to be discussing that. I brought out a panel of professionals that have been working side by side with me on this policy and on this campaign since the beginning. And I'm excited to bring them all up. So can the panelists come on up? We have another panelist that's looking for parking, and you know how this is, Logan Square. There ain't no parking, y'all. You might as well park on the west side and take a Uber back. But needless to say, when she comes in, Kiana, when she comes in, she'll introduce herself as well. So we'll start at the end, and you want to give your name, your organization, and one thing that's inspiring you about today's event.
Brendan Schiller, I have two organizations, but we'll go with Westside Justice Center. I'm inspired to see so many people interested in trying to figure out ways to turn marijuana legalization into actual reparations for people who are impacted by marijuana drugs.
Hello everybody, my name is Seke Ballard. I'm the founder of Greater Capital. I'm inspired by the energy that I see with this industry. You know, there's an opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really create some meaningful generational wealth. And this event, others that I've been a part of throughout the city, showed me that there are people who are really mobilized by it, and that energizes me.
My name is Barrington Rutherford. I'm Barrington Rutherford. I'm Senior Vice President of Real Estate and Community Integration for CRESCO Labs, one of the largest multi-state operators in the country. I have the privilege to operate in this industry and the opportunity that this industry provides to create win-win-win scenarios for people, for communities, and for our patients.
Yeah, so the process of this panel discussion is that we'll do a round of introductions like we just got done doing. Then we'll get into a little bit more detail on each of the people that are on the panel. And then we'll have Q&A. So you want to pause. If you have questions in mind, hold those questions to the end, and I promise. And if not, we'll find the people that are on this panel, pull them to the side. If they have anything that you're interested in, find out more about it. It's really important to network while you're here. So we'll get to the questions. Seke, Greater Capital grants loans to promising cannabis companies. How do you define promising cannabis companies, and how can the people here prepare themselves to be considered one?
Well, we've been doing this since 2017, and historically we lend to established cannabis companies. So these are people who are already licensed. They've been in business on average 8 years, which is quite a lot of time when you think of the newness of this industry. In places like California, medical cannabis has been legal for a couple decades. So you can really look at a financial and operating history, which are two really important components that we look at when we're lending. Additionally is the collateral that the business is able to provide for the loan. In Illinois, it's different because it's completely new, so you don't have a lot of existing operators, or at least the people who we're targeting aren't existing operators. So we have to rethink how we provide capital to those people, and really it boils down to if you look at your personal credit and how that fares, as well as your ability to secure the loan with assets that you own. Maybe that's real estate, maybe that's a home, it could be a number of different things, but it's a way of opening financing to people who are just getting into the business rather than only those who have been operational.
Thank you. In Barrington, CRESCO is one of the largest vertically integrated multi-state cannabis operators in the United States. For people new to the cannabis industry, what does vertically integrated mean? So that's a thing we need to know about, right? And as one of the true Chicagoans working in the industry, what are some of the common misconceptions about the field? And what does the actual work look like? Because I know a lot of times we think, oh, it's a dispensary, you get to smoke and chill. Like, no, there's actual work that goes into this, right? So what does that work look like?
So the first question, vertically integrated means that we do, and other vertically integrated companies do everything in the cannabis industry from seed to sale. So we are, and I think that sort of goes into the answer to the second question of the sort of misconceptions. And I think you're right that lots of people think that there's a lot of weed laying around on conference tables in our office, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think the misconception is that I think the thing to know about the large companies, especially one like CRESCO, is that we are a team of absolute experts in everything that we do. We've assembled experts from every industry particularly from consumer packaged goods, because that's how we view ourselves as a consumer packaged goods and a house of brands. And so these are experts from fields like sales and marketing, experts in operations, which means on the cultivation side, that those are experts in horticulture, for example. And in extraction, those are chemical engineers who have spent a good amount of time preparing themselves for any sort of career in chemical engineering. In real estate and finance and accounting. So these are our folks that you would find who have worked in some of the best and brightest companies around the United States, and they've come to the cannabis industry. And our mission, frankly, is normalizing and professionalizing this industry, in fact. So it makes sense that our marketing folks come from Miller Coors and Gatorade and brands that you have heard of that have established themselves as experts in their field.
Thank you. And then Brendan Schiller. So if you don't know Brendan Schiller has been a long-time advocate for communities of color in the city of Chicago. He's been involved in fights and on the picket lines, and he's been in all different corners. So it was really interesting to find him in the cannabis arena. So Brendan, what is your vision for equitable cannabis in Chicago? In particular, how can cannabis change and serve as a tool to decriminalize Black existence in the city of Chicago?
I think I appreciate the intro. I think to answer that question, there needs to be some context laid, some foundation. 5 years ago, the medical cannabis program opened up. There was 57 dispensary licenses granted, 55 currently operate, and there were 20 full grow licenses granted. For all intents and purposes, there was essentially one majority minority owned company that got one dispensary and one grow license, and then there were 2 Black partners who had a piece of some of the other licensing. Over the past 5 years, Illinois, interestingly enough, became home to 4 of the major multi-state operators: CRESCO, GTI, Pharma, Cann, arguably fit a group called Grassroots Funds. There's been massive consolidation in Illinois. So those 55 dispensary licenses are essentially owned right now by 17 companies. Those 20 grow licenses are essentially owned by 11 companies, 9 of which are now in one way or another multi-state operators. And in that process, the 2 major Black partners in those two companies no longer are partners. And the one majority minority owned company is no longer majority minority owned. In 2017 in this country, more money was spent on legal marijuana in the 29 states that had some form of legal marijuana than was spent on ice cream in the 50 states that have legal ice cream. In 2017, more money was spent on marijuana in the 29 states that had some form of legal marijuana than was spent on Oreo cookies. In the 29 states that had some form of legal marijuana, where marijuana was legal, you were still 3 times more likely to encounter the criminal justice system if you were a Black man between the age of 15 and 22 than if you were a white man between the age of 15 and 22, even though white men between the ages of 15 and 22 actually smoked more marijuana than Black men between the age of 15 and 22.
Can you say that louder?
What we know about every form of criminal justice enforcement when it comes to drugs, and what I mean by every form, I mean whether it's legalization, whether it's enforcement of legalization, whether it's enforcement of criminalized drugs, whether it's asset forfeiture, whether it's pretrial bail, every form not only has a devastating criminal justice impact on Black and brown communities, it has a devastating economic development impact on Black and brown communities. And what we know is that every state where there's been marijuana that's gone from medical marijuana to mature medical marijuana, it hasn't gone back. And where it's gone from mature medical marijuana to recreational marijuana, it hasn't gone back. But simultaneously, the economic development has been consolidation and moving out of any Black and brown entrepreneurs that had any piece of it at the original stage. And that's just a fact. Richard is right. The Illinois bill was a very good bill as it relates to the upcoming licensing coming out and the opportunities for the upcoming licensing. To clarify, there's 250 points scoring for the 75 dispensary applications that are currently open. And out of those 250 points, 50 go to social equity, 20%. You cannot get a license if you can't prove your social equity applicant. Now, we can go on down the line about how there may be some loopholes in that. If there may be some companies who are wholly owned and operated by white male millionaires who are going to be social equity applicants for a variety of reasons. But generally speaking, those licenses will not, 100% of those licenses will go to people who are deemed social equity applicants by the state, because it's impossible under this point to get it without it. And there are also some very good provisions under the state law as it relates to assisting folks who are both social equity applicants in terms of the scoring and also have financial need. There's some very good aspects of the state law in terms of other programs, things like the Restore Invest Renewal Program, or whatever, the RRR program, and other programs. But the bottom line is, if we're going to be true to what the purpose of legalization is and make it some form of reparations, then the community has to begin to hold the industry. And with all due respect to Barrington, a company like CRESCO that has basically four white male owners who are all own more than $200 million worth of CRESCO stock right now. There has to be more than sharecropping, as Alderman Burnett said. There has to be actual ownership and control of the rest of the licenses going forward. And the only way that's going to be done is with vigilance by the community.
I think I want to highlight one piece of the bill that hasn't been up yet. We have 800,000 Chicago, Illinois residents are going to have their records expunged. And anybody that had, and that's humongous, right? Like, you don't know how many folks that can't, there was a box on that. Remember when we all went to college, right? And you had to fill out the FSA students, and you got to that one box and it's like, have you ever been caught for possession of a controlled substance? Like, that no longer matters for those folks. And that's a very big burden off of the back of young folks that are getting ready to enter universities or have to apply for a job. It doesn't make sense that for so long they weren't able to because they got caught with some cannabis, right? So that's one thing that we'll talk about as well. So the next question for Kiana, who has just been the joy of, we have a series called Chronic Conversation. Shout out to that if y'all haven't been there. And Kiana's been a regular on that in our community forums, and it was definitely a principle in how we were able to galvanize the support to change the policy from what it was to what it is now. And we got to understand this bill looked nothing like it does now, right? A year ago, right? It took a lot of work to get it to where it is now, and it still has a lot of work to go. Like, this is not over. Like, I was in Springfield, they were passing a bill on liquor. I'm like, shit, liquor's been illegal for a long time. But it's still, there's still things that have to be adjusted. So democracy demands that the people that have a problem with something play a part in solving that problem. And often that's by calling your legislators, taking trips down to Springfield, all of that. So Kiana's done all of that. So I will pause there and get to the question. Chicago NORML strives to educate and motivate communities of color to destigmatize and accept the cannabis plant as a vehicle for political, economic, and health and wellness empowerment. What does success in the cannabis industry look like to you? And what are you currently doing to achieve success in communities of color in Chicago?
That's a heavy question. What success looks like to me, and I think I can speak on behalf of the rest of Chicago NORML when I say It looks like true ownership, right? It looks like true opportunity, and not just where we are limited or kind of cornered into these very kind of specific pockets where we're being slid into, but in all aspects of the business, right? So to me, it looks like being able to absolutely find an accountant of color, right? That, you know, for my cannabis business, and someone to package my stuff, you know, that someone is of color, that is getting, that I can give my business to people who look like me, right? And people who will respect, you know, what we've gone through to get here, and also people who have a passion for not just for profits and making money in the industry, but for the culture and for the industry itself, right? So it was, you know, when you talk about Chicago NORML, I'm gonna just, you know, toot our horns here, because we've been giving back to the community as it relates to cannabis before the community ever had anything to give to us, right? We was doing, clap for that, right? Like, we've been working and doing this thing literally for free. So those trips back and forth to Springfield, and those trips even that we've taken to Washington, D.C., we had to pay for that ourselves, right? And so when we look at what's happening now, where it seems like there's so many, you know, different entities that are coming in, that are trying to get a piece of the pie that we baked, that we helped to put together, that, you know what I'm saying? Like, we was literally out there, not literally, but we were out there churning butter to make this pie that y'all eating off of, right? And so we take that very seriously. And I missed the last part of your question, but I think what you asked was, what are we currently doing? We're doing the same thing we've been doing. That's the thing. Like, that's the point. We've been doing it, right? So we're still doing the dispensary agent training classes. Now we have the responsible vendor training. RPA T2 class is a state certified curriculum that I wrote on behalf of my company, Elevated Education, LLC. So we are state approved training providers, which we were providing the training before there was a state approval to get, right? So we're still doing that. We're still having our monthly meetings. We're still combing through the law, chewing it up and spitting it out in digestible portions for our members. We're still, you know, ringing the bell and sounding the alarm on things that, you know, that come up to us. It's interesting that we're having, and I don't know if y'all talked about this already, but it's interesting that the whole, you know, put the brakes on dispensaries in Chicago thing is coming up, and that people are so up in arms about, you know, what is in the law and what's been in the law. Like, we literally wrote a blog post about that on May 6th of 2019, right? We literally were trying to have these conversations and ringing these alarms and saying, yo, y'all need to be really, you know, people need to be paying attention to this. So we've been doing it. We just don't keep doing what we've been doing, and hopefully, you know, just keep being effective and even have more of an impact and really work through those relationships and just get things in the right place.
Can I add something to what she was saying? One of the themes that I've noticed in answers is that one of the things that we're all looking for, how we define success here, is true ownership. And my view is that the root cause of why you don't see true ownership elsewhere is capital. It's all related to the ability to finance your ability to apply for an application and then apply for a business once you've been licensed. You can look across the nation and other states and municipalities that have made provisions that benefit social equity applicants. Massachusetts is a great example. But if you look at the actual outcome in terms of how many of these people submitted completed applications, how many of these people were awarded a license and were able to finance their business getting up and running, and the results are awful. And so I think that risk is absolutely a risk for Illinois as well. And if we want to see true ownership, and the question is, how do you take advantage of this 20% of the points going to social equity applicants? How do you finance those people who qualify for social equity and you know, allow them to be able to put together a compelling application? I think that's one of the things that we really need to figure out, you know, as advocates, as you know, people who want to see success in Chicago. One example is the state's Cannabis Business Development Fund. That's $30 million that's available for people who want low interest loans, grants, or incubation services, but it's not enough. It's absolutely not enough. So I just want to underline that as, I think, what is a central challenge of accomplishing true ownership.
Thank you for that. And so I got one broad question I'm gonna ask everybody, and anybody can take on, right? So I was in college, right? And a close friend of mine, remained anonymous, had an amazing cannabis business. This was back in the early 2000s. And how does that individual who knows the craft, knows the different strands, et cetera, but has a gap, right? Because the application process is intense. The writing skills have to be up. All those things. They need to consult with a number of different firms in order to put through a competitive application. How does that individual get from informal to formal, right?
So I think one thing that's really important is that you get points in the application for demonstrating your knowledge of the industry. My belief is that the informal and the formal economies aren't that different. I mean, you have to figure out, product, where you're getting it from, how much you're charging for it, profit margin, all the inputs to the business are there. The only difference is they're not paying taxes and they're not reporting certain things. And I think that's something you should talk about, absolutely, in the application. In terms of how do you put together an application, because you're right, it's not a trivial undertaking. I think that there are some ways to figure out a North Star for the application. So the IDFPR, which is the state agency that is responsible for regulating dispensaries, they are barred by law, by the law that passed, from revealing any of the applications or the details of the applications of the medical operators. But if you wanted to get that same information from the Zoning Board of Authority, you could file a FOIA with them to see what does a successful application look like. You'd be an idiot if you copy it, one for one. But this is just a way to see what success looks like. What does excellence look like without having to spend a whole bunch of money on a consultant or a lawyer. But once you get beyond that point, you will probably require some external, experts to help you put together a compelling application. And again, the state provides resources to allow you to be able to do that, particularly if you're a social equity applicant. The Department of Commerce has resources available to you to access so that, again, it's not as big of an out-of-pocket expense for you.
So I'm always going to blow the education whistle. I've always said that education is, you can wash your traditional market experience through education, right? Education is the great experience launderer. Let's just look at it that way. So by that I mean, you can know what you know, how you know it, but if you go through, whether it's through Chicago NORML, whether it's through elevated education, if you go to an actual training class from a reputable organization, you can then put that on your resume, right? And then you can say, I know this because I went through this class, right? So it's one of those ways where you can, it's a nice thing that we have, reputable companies and organizations out there that are doing training. Be warned, there are some not as reputable ones out there that are doing it as well. So while it was good that we put that in as a state that, we had to be on the approved list, there's a lot of different people on that list. I'll just put it to you that way. But it is a good opportunity for you to take some classes, do some research. Your personal research matters as well, right? And so when you go to an interview, you have to know how to communicate, you have to know how to talk about your experience without talking about your experience. You have to find another way to kind of frame those things. And that's just a plain old communication, it would be nice, they should take you as you are. You should be able to come as you are and just be like, yo, I've been out here on the block hustling and doing, you should be able to just do that and put it out there, and that should be enough, right? If I had some place to hire you in, that probably would be a nice, weight. It would have a lot more weight than just some book learning. But, you gotta play the game the way the rules are written. And so you can't just go in and say, I'm hustling on the block for 13 years and whatever. So education through any kind of a training or continuing education program. There's a lot of them that are coming out now. It's a good way to do that.
Right. I'm gonna give y'all 2 minutes of compact legal advice that I charge a lot of money for. Real quick, there's 250 points. 5 years ago, there was 600 base points, 80 bonus points. All 680 were scalable. This time, there's 250 points. There's gonna be more than 2,000 people, probably about 4,000 groups, applying for 75 applications, only 47 available applications in the Chicagoland area. Of those 250 points, 60 are not scalable. They're up and down. 50 points for social equity, 5 points for 51% ownership by veterans, 5 points for 51% ownership by Illinois status. If you don't get all 60 of those points, if you don't have a group that's applying that gets all 60 of those points, you're not going to win. Of the 109 scalable points, there come 13 categories. One of those categories includes principal officer experience. I agree you can provide that with informal experience, but I believe that there will be 47 or more perfect scores in the Chicagoland area. If you have the experience that Richard is explaining, you need to find a couple other folks who you can team up with to put in an application that will get you a perfect score. That does include $100,000 in the bank, or $50,000 security bond, and $50,000 security account, and it does include a $5,000 filing fee that maybe you can cut in half depending on your economic status if you apply, if you qualify. But honest to God, it makes no sense to waste your time and money if you don't understand basic scoring, how this is going to go down, and the basic requirements you're going to need. There's 30 very specific requirements before your application gets tossed. And the panel is right. It is not known what happened 5 years ago, but I can tell you this. I interviewed a few people who did scoring last time. 45% of the applications never even got scored. They didn't meet basic requirements, they just tossed them. And the ones that got scored, some other ones got held up later because although it's supposedly redacted in a blind scoring, after they get to the finals, they do a vet on every single person. And if there's any factual statement that is incorrect, then you get tossed again. So there's no problem with informal education when you got a formal experience, when you got to meet the basic requirements and you can't bullshit about it.
I just want to add, I agree with everything that my colleagues have said here. I would just add simply that our experience, we are currently licensed and operational in 11 states. And in our experience, the key thing that you get that is needed to be successful in these applications that you can't unfortunately get from the informal economy is compliance. Illinois has always been a heavily regulated and compliance-focused state when it comes to regulating medical cannabis, and there's no reason to believe, nothing in the adult use legislation, nor in any of the regulations, or frankly in the form of the application that has been publicly released, should suggest that is going to change in any way. Compliance is key to being successful in merit-based applications.
Okay, we're going to.
Can I add simply one other thing? And this is sort of to echo what a point that Seke made earlier, which is that compliance costs money. Like, compliance is not free. Compliance requires attorneys like Brendan and others that are well versed in what the state requires and what all of the stakeholders, whether they be capital partners or regulators or even just the legislation. And so there's, again, just wanted to echo sort of all of the sentiments that were made. Education is absolutely the way that those who don't have experience in the formal cannabis industry can sort of shore that up. But the ability to have and identify qualified capital partners and folks that can help you through the compliance hurdles in this industry are critical to being successful in any merit-based application.
Thank you. So this has been a robust, I think, juicy conversation. I think there will be some greater conversations in the networking that occurs after this, right? So there's no way we can get through a 600 some odd page policy in 45 minutes, right? There's a lot of ins and outs. Those that want to plug in to engaging, right? Education right here. Pull his brother to the side, CRESCO, and say, look, I'm interested in starting a dispensary. What did you do to win? Seke has got a wealth of information. Britton Schill is an attorney who also can, out of all the other hats that he wears, can probably give you a few pointers in the right direction. But this last part is just the burning desires, right? You all came here individually, and you all have something that's like a burning desire that you want to get out to the public. So what are those things that are either they're keeping you up at night or are making you rest easy? We'll do a popcorn style. Whoever wants to go first, we go first. Is this a protest?
There's so many things.
Yeah, you gotta narrow it down. There's one thing that if you can't remember one message on your heart, what is it? You know what I mean? And
I think it's to focus people's attention on financing and capital. And I know I sound like a broken record, but Brendan sort of pointed out the cost. Just to apply what you have to have in escrow. If you're social equity, if you qualify as social equity, those amounts are lower, but they're still insurmountable for a lot of people. And so if a goal, if a chief mission, not just of the sponsors of the bill, not just of the governor, if the chief mission is to have this be an equity-centric market in Illinois, then this is really where the focus ought to be to make sure that that goal is achieved. And I think if we don't get it right, I think we're going to look a lot like states that have failed, to be completely honest. And so I'd like to be looking back on this a year from now, and thought that we figured it out.
I would just say that I would like for people to expand their thinking beyond just a dispensary or a craft grow. Owning a dispensary is not for everybody. Everybody should not be trying to apply in this first round. There are lots of other licenses, not lots, but we did the work to make sure there were other licenses and that there were other avenues for people to get involved in this industry that have much lower barriers to entry, that are much less risky and all the things, right? Look at some of the less sexy options. Also, I'm gonna sound like President Barack Obama, but I'm gonna say this: if you like your job, you can keep your job, right? And you can do the job that you do, perhaps, for the cannabis industry. So I've always been in training and education. I'm just doing it in the cannabis industry now, right? Because I liked my job and I wanted to keep my job. And so now here I am. So bloom where you're planted. Don't go for the easy or the hard, rather. Like, expand your mind, think beyond just what you see in front of you, and think about really whether or not there's something that you actually want to do. Last thing, don't just get in it for the money. Because the money ain't gonna be enough. Even if it's a lot, it's gonna be a lot like eventually. So before you get to that part, it's gonna suck. And you're not gonna wanna do it. And now you're gonna be took up space from somebody who really could have done it and if they had just kind of had the shot. So that's all I'm saying about it.
So I think that success in Illinois, given the social equity components of this bill, is absolutely about true ownership in the industry. But to Kiana's point, if that's not for everyone, and I think that there are hundreds of opportunities, there are hundreds of on-ramps into the cannabis industry besides owning a dispensary. I think that the wealth that is created by legalizing cannabis will be experienced in virtually every sector of this economy, whether it's real estate or packaging or marketing, professional services. So I think there's an on-ramp for you. And if you determine that owning your own cannabis business is the appropriate thing today, then I would encourage you to apply, no matter who you are or what your background is. But if you determine that ownership isn't, I think there's still an opportunity to participate in the wealth that's created by legalization of cannabis by finding other on-ramps, and whether they are in other small businesses that can be vendors to the industry, or whether they are in employment opportunities. And we believe that we will create 25,000 job opportunities across the country over the next 5 years. So there are, and these are living wage jobs, so available to the masses, from executive positions to all the way down to agricultural positions. There's an on-ramp for everyone available in this industry.
I'm going to go meta. I don't view legalization as an end. I don't view social equity as an end. I don't view either of them as a means to an end. I view them as part of the multifaceted, multi-generational process to end police, to end prisons, and to create justice in this world. And I recognize that not everybody in this room is going to agree with that. But for those who do agree with that, I encourage you, I ask you, I beg you to stay very vigilant in watching both our elected officials and the industry and the activists in this space to ensure that they're trying to operate within those principles.
We're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Best we can. We'll go here and then in the back of the class.
Is it a mic?
Yeah, you can stand up if you got a voice. You stand up and just do it. Yeah. Otherwise, we can try to get one of these mics to you.
Or he'll have to. Yeah, you can repeat it.
I can repeat it. Okay, go ahead.
So with regard to the social equity piece, the zoning that just passed, the zoning ordinance for Chicago that just passed, I would like to know the opinion from the panel on how the social equity component can factor into the zoning. Because there is a lottery process. A lot of people don't know that there is a lottery process. So if you get approved by the state, and the state gives you the designation that they have approved you for a license, a conditional license or whatever, you still have to go through a zoning process because it's a special use issue, and it's a zoning, it's a lottery process in order for you to get through that process and actually open up a dispensary in Chicago. Where is the social equity aspect to that as it relates to Chicago, and do you guys feel there needs to be some activists or some activist type of engagement to open up that lottery process, make it second chance lottery or whatever, to get the social equity component in there? Because it's not in there right now.
I'm gonna let Brendan. I'm a moderator today. I'm going to be a sidebar, but go ahead, Brendan.
It's not an easy answer, because the truth is, and I think everybody on the stage participated in some level of discussions with the city. I know that, and the city was trying to balance a bunch of different things. I know from their perspective, they created a lottery to assist social equity. From their perspective, part of what they were trying to do from creating the zones and creating a lottery to ensure that the Chicagoland area has 38 dispensaries, all of who are currently owned by the current industry, getting licensed before any social equity person gets a license, all of whom can own it, start operating January 1st, 2020, a year ahead of any social equity license holder. And theoretically, 38 new dispensaries could have opened up in downtown and near north, near west side, and owned by the current industry. So part of what I think the city was trying to accomplish was to prevent that from happening. They were trying to accomplish 2 or 3 other things, which I don't necessarily agree with. And then something what was going on, and frankly, I was involved behind the scenes in a bunch of these conversations with a bunch of these aldermen, is the Black Caucus, which frankly was a little late to the game. And I understand the frustration from Chicago NORML and from Kiana and from other activists. They were a little late to the game. They got out of the game like 3 weeks ago. They started making calls and saying, how can we create more social equity? But they didn't want to say that publicly. They wanted a different public presenting face for reasons I can't speak for them. And then they came in. What you ended up with, in terms of city ordinance, was a bunch of more restrictions that was further impact. It's intended to further impact the folks who get to put their licenses on January 1st. It does impact folks who are trying to get their licenses done for January 1st, 2021. I can't speak to the city or the Black Caucus. I have reasons to suspect that their hope is that they create obstacles for the first 6 months of 2020 for the current industry, and that maybe they remove those obstacles 6 months down the line. But if they don't remove those obstacles, then there is a bunch of onerous legal fees and zoning requirements for the social equity applicants that will come online in January 2021. So, should that answer that?
Okay. In the back, glasses.
How can you have true ownership if you cannot own a person?
What?
How can you have true ownership if you can't own a person?
So, I have a question. So, like, as far as people who work in like investment groups that are trying to put together people to do this, what are your recommendations for people who consider working?
You repeat the question, so.
He asked, what would we recommend for people who are looking to put together investment groups? The first thing that I would recommend, and this I think could be true from both the owner perspective as well as the investor perspective, is that you decide what's the structure of the financing. So are you raising a debt fund or are you raising an equity fund? And there are important differences between those two. So, you know, if you're looking to just lend money to people at an interest rate, you know, you get that money back in addition to the interest. But if you're looking to invest in the business in the form of equity, then you're giving them money, but you're not getting any money in return. Instead, you're getting a percentage of their business in return. Those are important to sort of think through because they have implications that investors are putting in. And so, you know, actually that's what Good Tree Capital is. We are a debt fund, so investors across the country, they give us checks that are all pooled into a fund, and we use that fund to make loans to licensed cannabis companies, and in Illinois, licensed and new cannabis companies. If you're looking to invest in equity, then I think that becomes a question of, you know, how much is this thing worth that we're investing in? So if it's all brand new, you know, it's really, it's not a science figuring out what something like that is worth. So it just comes down to the negotiation between the investor and the owner. If I give you X amount of money, how much ownership do I get in return? And then one additional important consideration is, once we've done all the fundraising, whether that fundraising is through equity or whether that fundraising is through debt, do we have enough money to get us to the next sort of critical juncture for the entity? So, you know, if it costs you $750,000 to apply and then purchase real estate and then build that real estate up, and you only raise 50, then, you know, what's the point?
I'm sorry, I want to go back and just answer one part of the zoning thing. This is really important. For people who are planning on applying, you don't need your location. There's muscle memory from 5 years ago where there was such a game of points. So while there's onerous zoning in the state of Chicago, if you want to apply it in the Chicago district, don't worry about your location. Worry about all those other points we talked about earlier.
All right, so that, everybody has any questions, you want to save those questions, and if you have to get up, be inside of the room, tap them, pull them to the side, have that one-to-one, get a business card, and we want to thank the panel for coming out. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, and everybody, we've got another panel starting in a few minutes, so I want to invite, you know, after we get a group photo, to go next door to the expo into Emporium, and anyone who wants to speak with them, to please follow them over there to ask questions of them there. Thank you so much. This topic needs much more than an hour to take me here. So if you are not staying for the consumption of cooking panel, please head next door. Thank you. Thank you all. This was phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too. That's good. I'll let you get
their seats for the next panel to learn more about methods of consumption and cooking. And if we could have all our panelists we're going to start off for those of hello? If you are continuing a conversation from the social equity panel, if you could just table it until after after this. We appreciate it. Okay, Maja, who did the course this morning, is going to do a brief introduction talking about the methods of consumption to help people understand length of time to onset and the effects. And when she's done with that, I'm going to call up Mike Sula, who is the reader lead food critic, and he's going to bring up the rest of the panel. Thank you.
All right. Everybody can hear me? Yes? Okay. Good. Hello again. For some of you, I saw you in the morning. For some of you, I didn't. My name is Maja. I am very, very happy to be here today and partnered with the reader and what Lisa's been able to accomplish with this event. Really fantastic, and I'm really excited to hear this panel. We've got some amazing experts, and it's going to be a really insightful opportunity for all of us. I was given the task to do some more education and explain to you fine folks how exactly does cannabis consumption affect a human being? What are the different forms of consuming cannabis? And what exactly are we going to expect with each form of that consumption? So I'll talk a little bit about that so that you have a better idea. Just so everyone is well aware, most retail spaces today sell about 50% of their sales is predominantly flour, right? When I talk about flour, I mean like the dry herb. I don't mean like the flour that maybe cooks with to make a cake. I mean the actual dry herb portion of it. So flour is, always something that remains king in cannabis and really something people utilize quite a bit. But as we become more and more innovative, as we become more and more educated, we decide that we can consume cannabis in a ton of different ways. And smoking becomes just one option for us. And it opens up the arena to be able to consume as an edible, which we'll talk about in detail in a little bit, or to use a more medical fashion, suppositories or patches or things of that nature. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I want to take it back to smoking. So the reason that people smoke cannabis is because it goes into this bloodstream almost instantaneously. Right away, as it would be if you took an injection of some sort, but it's relatively close. You take a puff of something, it comes into the lungs, the capillaries send it right into the bloodstream. It really affects very quickly. And that's predominantly into smoking cannabis because they feel the effects right away and they're able to find that relief that they're looking for relatively quickly. So it becomes relatively important for folks, right? So that's one form of consuming cannabis. And it's a quick onset, but just as quick as cannabis smoking can happen, it also is about 2 to 4 hours. It's a very short-lived onset, right? So you smoke cannabis, it goes into your bloodstream relatively quickly, now you feel the effects of it, but you're only going to find that relief 4 hours. So I want you to keep that thought process in mind as we talk about some of these other methods and whatnot. Now, vaping is another, right? It's been all over the news. We all know the vaping bans in certain states and whatnot. Well, those are street market products, it's not cultivation products typically. And so vaping is similar to smoking. When you inhale the vapors, the vapes of the combustion product, you are now inhaling that. It's going into the bloodstream, getting into the same onset fashion, lasts about 2 to 4 hours, maybe a little bit shorter. And that becomes a big part of how people like to consume cannabis today. So the difference between smoking and vaping, what exactly is it, right? So when I smoke something, I light it on fire. And that combustion that happens creates smoke and soot, and I'm inhaling all of that, right? That's what you're inhaling. When you vaporize something, you have a battery. And that battery tends to slowly heat up the liquid distillate that's inside of that pen. And it heats it up, gets to a temperature where it stops between combustion stage. And it stops as a vapor and you inhale the vapor. So that's the difference between smoking and vaping. If anybody needs to have our answer. So then you've got inhalers, you've got tinctures and sublinguals. Tinctures are a great fashion to really medicate patients, right? We're looking at a baby Motrin bottle typically. Has a dropper size on the top. Take a dropper full, put it underneath in your mouth, underneath your tongue, swish it around if you have the capability to do so. And when you do that, it takes about 10 to 20 minutes for the onset, for it to go through the sublingual process to get into your bloodstream. And so that really typically helps quite a bit. And so you've got that as an option as well. You've got oils in your waxes. Your oils and your waxes are relatively interesting. This is a concentrated form of cannabis. So we take this huge dry plant, we extract all of the components out of it, we use butane or alcohol in some cases, or CO2 here now, right? And so you take this and now you have a concentrated form of what cannabis is. This is very strong. This is what we refer to as dabbing, right? We take dabs of this. But this can also be the RSO oil, or as I like to refer to it as activated cannabis oil, right? And so there's some things to think about from that aspect. And then of course we have the always favorite edibles. And these edibles are a great way for us to consume cannabis and have a long time relief. So you can find about 6 to 8 hours of relief with an edible cannabis. The only thing is that when you eat cannabis, depending on your history of your gastrointestinal health, it can take 1 to 2 hours for it to kick in. In some cases, maybe only 30 minutes. So you need to be patient when you eat edibles. You need to know your dosing. You need to understand the safety ramifications behind what it's like to eat cannabis. And understand that it doesn't just go right into the bloodstream. Your liver has to get it first. It decarboxylates it, then it sends it in through the blood-brain barrier, and it makes that cannabis just a little bit stronger, right? So some people will say 8 times stronger or whatever it is, but it does make cannabis edible stronger than a smokable fat. So it's something to keep in mind when you're choosing different alternatives for consumption. There's also patches, there's topicals, those are great to be able to utilize, and we also have suppositories. So believe it or not, there's just a ton of different ways to consume cannabis. And it's changing more and more depending on the patient that you're looking at, depending on your shopping style as an adult use, recreational user. What do you like to use best and what makes the most sense for you, right? And so this is the process that you would think about as you choose products in a dispensary. And then we've got a great panel to explain more about that.
Thank you, Maja. So that's a good lead-in to some very wonderful panel. Before I talk the panel, Michael, will you raise your hand, please? Michael started medical cannabis recipe community on Facebook and helps a lot of patients learn how to make their medicine at low cost. So now I want to call up Mike Sula, who is the lead restaurant critic for the Chicago Reader. He's been contributing to the Reader since 1995 on a range of topics, from politics, crime, paleontology, film, you name it, he's probably covered it. So he's been published in Harper's, The Trib, The Sun-Times, NPR, and The Eater, and I have to tell you, he is a James Beard Foundation winner for an article. I'll give you the title, I'm gonna let you guess what this is about. It's called Chicken of the Trees. So if no one has eaten squirrel, all right, and with that, I'm gonna call up Mike, who will introduce the rest of the panel.
Hi, everybody. We have an esteemed panel of chefs here. But first, I'm going to ask everybody who has cooked with cannabis in the past? Who has cooked with cannabis a lot, or regularly? Great. Okay. So, those of you that haven't, you probably do have a story, heard stories about, you save your schwags for a certain amount of period, and throw it in a box of cake mix, throw it in the oven, and then you're staring into the abyss for the rest of the day. We moved all beyond that, and our chefs here, we're at the forefront of culinary cannabis here in Chicago, ably demonstrate that. So let me introduce them. We have Mindy Siegel from Hot Chocolate. Mindy also has a line of chef quality edibles by CRESCO. We have Manny Mendoza of Herbal Notes. Gavrilos Great Underground Dining Series, Bi-Coastal, Tri-Coastal, Third Coast, and West Coast. And then we have Rosca Vargas of Panda, catering, teaching, traveling. And then, please help me mention, we also have Michael McGee. He's the founder of Medical Cannabis Recipe Community, a Facebook group that provides educational support for those wanting to make their own medicine. Is available to answer all of your questions when we're done. So, we've been cooking with cannabis for thousands of years, but it's only been since the advent of legalization that you have chefs in the professional realm sort of working with it, taking it forward, innovating with it. these three are all about that. All three of you, I've talked to you in the past, story together. You all, in one form or another, come to it from a medical perspective. Either you're treating yourself or treating your loved one. But what I want to ask you as chefs is, does cannabis have a place in the professional chef's larder the way that, say, garlic or oregano or truffles or foie gras? Is cannabis a legitimate ingredient when it comes to professionally trained chefs, and by extension, homebrewers?
Anybody want to take this? Personally, I want to thank everybody for being here today and taking time off your schedule to join us. And the answer to your question, Mike, I believe that it does. I think that the flower itself has a lot of benefits and contains a lot of flavor profiles that can definitely be used as a spice rack. Terpenes are a really big thing for me. And to me, that is just an extra additional spice rack where I can hold in 200 flavors that I want to mix and match with, as if I would salt, pepper, cumin, what have you.
Absolutely. Hell yes. I think it absolutely needs to be on the path of every restaurant for chefs that really want to pursue like out-of-the-box experiences for their guests. I particularly love working with solventless concentrates and even keef for most infusion. And there's so many high-quality concentrates like rosins, live rosins especially. They're primarily best to dab with, but if you have a little bit extra and you can infuse that into a truffle oil or into Calabrian chili oil, or like a bunch of different blends of different oils and herbs and spices that you can use to combine them with the terpenes from the cannabis, obviously the THC and the rest of the spectrum of cannabinoids, you can start to create like a little harmony, a little orchestra, and on your spice rack or on the paths of the restaurant. So that's primarily why I got into it, is to start to see products like that I would be able to see at some of my favorite chefs that I grew up watching and working for. I wanted to see a product that was infused with cannabis on their path, and before they sent it to table 28, they would give it a little extra love before I went out.
Well, it's weird for me because I'm a baker and I own a restaurant. I do make pastries for a living. So for me, my approach is a little bit different, I think, than two of you, is that I really kind of approach it as, not only as another ingredient, but I'm kind of thinking about like the best cookie you could ever eat, and it just happens to have an effect an hour later. For me, I have a different approach to it, so that's why I wanted them to answer.
Well, you guys touched on two questions I wanted to get into also, but let's first talk about concentrates. There are pros and I think mostly pros actually when it comes to cooking with concentrates versus flour. Do you guys want to speak to the pros and cons of cooking with concentrates versus flour?
I'm sure you're going to add So, for my product, we use concentrates. We don't use butter. And we find that... Canna butter, right. I use canna butter. For these edibles, we use concentrates. And the reason why we do that is because we can get the product into a large batch easier, more effective, and more consistently. And so, in a professional standpoint, using concentrates is a way better approach. And a little bit goes such a long way. So, for us, that's how we approach it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. glad you went first. Yeah, cooking with concentrates, it's a lot easier to dose and measure out and be accurate, everything that a maker would say. And absolutely, everything needs to be precise. So it's a lot easier to measure and gauge when you're cooking with a concentrate. A con that would be to cooking with concentrate. Well, really high quality ones, you really don't want to cook with them, you want to dab them because they're so delicious. You want to be able to experience it firsthand. And when you cook with it, you kind of, you compromise the integrity of that actual product. It's a very premium, high quality product in most cases. However, if you have like a surplus of ice hash or rosin, those are not as expensive, but you can use them and they're solventless, and that would actually be a pro. But con would be, right, you wouldn't want to waste something that is very, very precious. And with flour, for example, or did we get to that yet? Well, yeah, with flour, I do minimal cooking with flour because of the same reasons. It's really hard to measure and gauge unless you have like an at-home test kit, which most people don't. I just ordered one, but that's just for my own personal R&D, but it's not something that I feed people. I don't make infusions with flour necessarily for any of the events that we do, just because I wouldn't be able to truly and accurately say that that has 5 milligrams or that has 10 milligrams. It would just be a guess. And I can't do that, and I can't take that risk with people, and I think that's what we're all trying to do forward is through this education is stop guessing and be more accurate with something that's medicine. It could really affect people in a positive or negative way. But it's up to us to be able to know what we're cooking with as cooks and chefs.
Rosia, you do a lot of teaching for home cooks. What do you come down on?
A little bit of everything. I really like concentrates, like these two mentioned. Really, it's for the flavor profile. I like concentrates because they are easier to dose. They are easier to just handle. I've been that chef that has used, bought an ounce, 2 ounces of flour, worked on a magical butter machine or ardent or, crock pot method. I've looked at all those YouTube videos and, I've wasted a lot of product. So there goes a lot of money down the drain that I really didn't anticipate transitioning over into the cannabis industry and working with the flower. The flower, yeah, you really don't know, your label can say a certain percentage, but you also have to do that math when it's lost through the decarbing method, whether it's in the oven or, you're cooking with it. You lose a lot of that potency, you lose a lot of the flavor profiles. So again, I agree with the two chefs when we come to cooking. I definitely love using concentrates. I love using tinctures as well for certain beverages. So it definitely, concentrates is my way to go.
Right, there's a loss during the decarb process, during the extraction process, during the infusion process. You're continually losing THC, so it gets really harder to actually gauge what's actually ending up. But if I had a pro for flour, because I love flour, the natural terpenes of the actual plant can provide a lot of really great flavor still. Whenever I'm cooking with it, I don't decarb it all the way. Basically, I don't burn it, because you wouldn't put basil in the oven and take it out and expect it to taste good. You would want to use it as fresh as possible. So if you have access to fresh plant material, that can be used. I like to use sous vide method with different flour and do it very low and slowly in a contained, like sealed bag. Or you could even do it in a mason jar. Basically, you're sealing in all the flavors so that, because all the terpenes are very volatile, they'll evaporate. You want to secure as much of those flavor without compromising the actual plant material so that it turns brown and gets on. It smells like nutty popcorn or like burnt popcorn, and that's not necessarily a flavor that chefs want to highlight. We want to get away from that. If anything, the natural terpenes that are in the flour can be extracted and used. I use sous vide when I work with flour. That way I can understand the temperature and the time, and then from that I can gauge at least, I know I'm not getting as much THC out of it, but I am starting to pull THCA and other cannabinoids, and especially preserving the terpenes. So highly recommend if you're cooking with flour, use a method that is similar to that so that you're preserving the flavor and not just wasting it just for the sake of the THC, which is like whatever. I'm not super big on, just the THC alone. It's the whole plant, it's the full spectrum.
Okay, that walks right up to our next question. Do strains matter when it comes to cooking, and how much do they matter? But I mean, do the individual flavor profiles of different cultivars and also their effects, are they important after infusion and cooking, or how much of that does get lost? Is it worth pairing specific strains to specific foods, and how much does that come across on the plate?
I think that in the case of Manny, when he's talking about that he likes the whole plant, he likes the quality of the plant, he's not trying to extract all the THC out of it and get everything else out of it, then that's something that would be a strain specific or a flavor profile or a terpene profile. In my case, we use clear distillate, so we're at the tasteless and odorless level, and so for that it doesn't matter. We do sometimes reintroduce terpenes into product, but for the most part, you don't taste it. So there are pros and cons to that too. And to be honest with you, when we were starting out, we were always using clear distillate, and then we changed. We went back to winterized oil, and I mean, there's pros and cons to it. I mean, I think that a lot of for people that have never had an edible, have no idea what they're doing, to start out with something that has the no taste, no smell, it's kind of good, you don't know, you just feel like you're enjoying something and you're eating something, and for me, in a way, and I'm on the fence about it because, I like the taste of terpenes and I like the taste of flower, but as a businesswoman, I almost like the fact that it is tasteless, and I feel like it can appeal to so many different people. The greatest thing about being in Illinois is that we're very highly regulated state. So when it says 10 milligrams, it's 10 milligrams. It's exactly 10 milligrams. And so if you start out with 10 milligrams, you know that you've never eaten an edible before, you want to take half of that edible and you want to eat it and wait to see what your effects are. So it's like a commitment to kind of teach yourself how to eat it. Because I'm sure that everybody in this room has a story about eating too much marijuana.
We can all share those.
Yeah, it happens. So I think that, like having it regulated, I know this is now changing the subject a little bit, but having it regulated is so important and makes it almost user-friendly as January approaches, I guess.
We're definitely going to come to January.
Okay, fine.
No, but that's good. I want to give Rocio and Manny a chance to respond to the strain question. Particularly when it comes to cooking. Like I know, Manny, you played a lot of your infusions as like sauce and garnish and things like that. And Rocio, I know you use RSO a lot, so maybe you guys can speak to those.
I definitely use RSO as well. I mean, activated cannabis. It's as long as you understand what it is you're doing, it becomes very easy to work with. But as far as being strain specific, when I'm cooking with different strains of flour, that's when I would do the sous vide method, and then not fully decarboxylate, and I'll pull those essential oils or cannabinoids into whatever that carrier oil is. Usually, sometimes I'll, be a little bit more creative and add, extra spices or extra, I'll add ginger and turmeric and, curry leaves, just to make this super herbaceous and spice blend that includes terpenes from whatever the strain is, and just to make something a little bit more well-rounded. When I'm trying to cook with cannabis, I look at flour, I look at the cannabis, but I don't just think about that's where it stops. I worked on a farm, and I got a lot of experience and a lot of my personal philosophy from working with things that are growing out of the ground and how they work in synergy and work as companion plants with one another. So I have the same philosophy within the cooking that I do. if I'm gonna cook with certain spices and vegetables, I'm also gonna complement it with something else that possibly it grew next to. So I'm trying to create something a little bit more diverse with different strains and try to highlight those strains. But once you decarboxylate it too much, you lose those essential oils, which are extremely volatile. Those are what particularly guide the effect of the strain. So if you don't have any essential oils, it doesn't really matter what the strain is because it's just THC at that point. But if you still have terpenes intact, that's when you get the sativa, high, or you get the indica low effects, which vary greatly. Those two terms are pretty much arbitrary at this point because everything's hybridized. But the terpenes are extremely important, and once you lose those, once those boil off, it doesn't really matter what the strain is. But if you want to focus on the strain, preserve the terps.
Just really quickly, but sometimes you'll add terpene isolates back in.
Oh yeah, totally. When it gets too expensive to just waste a bunch of flour that I would rather smoke. Now there's starting to be companies that either produce, they recreate botanically derived terpenes, so they put together their own blend of chemicals that replicate as close as possible to a strain. Or you can get cannabis-derived terpenes, which are extremely expensive and not worth seeking because they're just too expensive to just do that for food. But the best thing you can do is try to replicate it on your own by trying to be as conscious and to the actual plant and those terpenes that make it up, and where else you'll find those terpenes in nature, other spices, other herbs.
Yeah, I think Manny touched on a point with terpenes. Again, the strain specific, it's like a 50-50 for me. Because the strain can be any name, like Bubble Kush or Gorilla Glue, and in your brain you're already thinking, okay, this is how I feel with Gorilla Glue, this is how I feel with White Widow, but my brain functions as what terpenes are in this strain specific that I can either imitate or mock. If Gorilla Glue has this much limonene and this much myrcene in it, I would like to recreate that by using terpenes, and there are companies that are concentrated only on terpenes, and that's really what I like to use as well, because you do end up losing some of those flavor profiles. Or if you want to match something to, let's say I want to make my balsamic dressing with the blue cheese terpene, that's an isolated terpene, and blue cheese goes well with balsamic. So I don't know if it's really strain specific, but I think it would be really more to terpene specific and those terpenes that are in that strain.
Okay, I guess I want to ask you guys, just for the home cook, just sort of like the general question with regard to advice about dosing. Like how do you handle that when you're just getting started at home as average skilled home cook? How do you not put yourself on the floor?
A good key is been slow and low, or start off with a low dosing, wait 30 minutes, and then you didn't feel anything, or you're just like, this doesn't work. Wait another 10 minutes, just to double check, because what you're end up doing is just, what I call is greened out. You won't even know you need to lay down or something, and you start feeling sick, nauseous, and that's not something that we're trying to create when we come to our experiences.
As far as dosing advice for your home cook, now there's new products out there that can help you with that whole process. If you're just too familiar with all the science, you don't want to Google everything. There's a company now called Levo Oil Machine. There's a Levo 2 now, which is more advanced than the first one. It's so easy. Now they make it so easy for you to just drop flour in there. It'll tell you the time, set it from your app. It'll tell you the temperature, which is decarboxylating. It'll do everything but print out lab tests for you. But it'll basically do the activation, the extraction, and the infusion all in the same chamber, and then you just dispense it like a little Keurig. So it gets super easy to do it at home. Right, and the price point is becoming lower. If you want one, find me afterwards. Shameless plug. But no, absolutely, I definitely agree with low and slow. Absolutely, find your dose. Do not try to just get random products off the street and eat it and think that you're giving medicine to yourself. You're playing yourself. If you're doing that, you're setting yourself up, unfortunately. But the best advice would be to go low and slow and use products like RSOs that are already activated if you're not sure, because they're already calibrated for you, and it's simple math to put it into a recipe.
Okay, real quick, I want to ask the same question in the context of an event where you're dealing with a whole bunch of people with different tolerances. I know you, Manny, approach that in a very particular way. I'm not sure about UOCO, but maybe you took it as a topic.
I've been to events before, not my own, where the guests were allowed to say their own dosage, and I think that's nonsensical. I want 5 milligrams. Can I have 10? I'd like 15. Absolutely not. The way I do my dinners, usually there are 7 courses, and I do low and slow. Each course is 2 milligrams of CBD and 1 milligram of THC. So the entire menu is 14 and 7, so it's 2 to 1. And the whole point is that it's supposed to be low and slow. It's intro. I'm not here to try to get you as blasted as possible. The whole point is to introduce you to cannabis and food as medicine. And you can increase your THC intake if you like, because we pair each course with concentrate. So we'll have like a Puffco Peak or different dab rigs or different vaporizers that we'll pass around, we'll pre-pack, and we'll set you up so when the course drops, you get to also taste or vape at a very low temperature and get the full terpenes and get that experience while you enjoy your food. So it's kind of like drinking wine with your food. So that's one way at our events you can increase your dosage if you like. But when it comes to the food, because everybody's body is different, and it's impossible to say that 5 milligrams is safe for you and 5 milligrams is safe for you. I have no idea. It could be completely opposite. The best way to understand is this is what the menu is. It's very low, and it's leaning higher on the CBD if you'd like to increase. The Puffco Peak will be here shortly.
I agree with Manny. Some of the tactics that I use when it comes to dosing at my events is similar to the same method. It's just dosing low per course. And if guests want to indulge a little bit more, I do offer a complimentary dab bar. Some of my guests have been mostly patients, and we all know that being a patient here in the state of Illinois, you are suffering with an ailment that, pain level is just at an all-time high. So we already know that you're going to be taking 100 milligrams. You're going to be taking really high dosing. And since my dinners are at a low dosing, in order to get you to that level of relief, I do offer a complimentary dab bar for those that are seeking a little bit more. And I have had an occasion, when I first started, I had a guest of mine green out during my events, and I didn't know how to troubleshoot it. I'm thinking like, okay, give her some water. Okay, let's give her some air. And she just really needed some CBD. And, trial and error. And now I know that if someone does green out, one, I'm not going to dose them that high anymore. I learned my lesson. And two, I learned my own rule over time, just dose them lower, and if they want to, indulge some more, offer some additional services. Puffco, have them get a joint during one of their courses, or again, offering the dab bar.
I don't know what the level of everybody here, but it's very similar to like drinking, You're not going to do 5 shots of whiskey like within 10 minutes and not feel, well, wait a second. You're not going to do that and then go drive a car.
No.
So, it's the same thing. Or not feel like you're going to, like that's going to catch up with you and you're going to feel the effects of it. So, you know, for us, for my edibles, we are now starting to microdose so that people can enjoy a 2 milligram gummy, and it's so delicious, you could probably take another one. And so, you know, again, the low and slow, it's a like I said, it's a commitment to learn what your body and mind does. Cannabis. You have to figure out what your body can handle, and then you take it from there. So it's a slow process, it's a learning curve. It's just like drinking and learning how to be a champ at drinking. You know, you don't drink a bottle of champagne the first time you drink. Well, you probably do, and then you have to enjoy it. It's like the same thing. So you just want to, like, approach it like alcohol, and you probably, or maybe not, if you don't want to, you'll be good. You'll be good. You'll figure out what your level is.
Okay, 2 really important questions, and I want to open it up. Minnie, you and I talked about this last week, but why are sweets so dominant in the dispensary market, and why are good quality savories not?
Well, I'd like to say because my edibles are so good. Not the case. Again, you're in a highly regulated state, and there are rules, just like there would be if you were to buy something on the shelf like a chewing gum or like a candy. Everything has regulations, so everything has to be shelf stable. It's hard to do that with savory food. It's easier to, I guess it's easier, and the perception is easier to understand. Eating a piece of chocolate, eating a cookie, eating a gummy, eating a piece of like a hard candy, it's an easier perception. That's why these guys do the dinners, and it's easier to understand in a course setting to eat savory food. And then for pastry or for a candy, it's easier to eat it like in a little piece of dose form.
Okay, that brings me to January 1st. So I went to one of the recent town hall meetings with regards to zoning and dispensary licenses. The dominant question in the question and answer period, a number of people asked this, were really interested in consumption on premises licenses. They were interested in opening restaurants and cafes, maybe sort of like Amsterdam style coffee shops. But the grim truth is that, yeah, they're going to be consumption on premise licenses, but you are not going to be able to cook a la minute with cannabis in any legal form once the law passes. So I put this question out to Senator Steen's office. I asked about restaurants, I asked about pop-ups, and this was the very unfortunate answer that came back. She wrote, the only entities allowed to sell cannabis or cannabis-infused products are dispensaries. There are provisions under the dispensary article that state that all of their cannabis and cannabis-infused products must be sold from the physical retail location. The bill also restricts dispensaries from infusing cannabis with their own products, and it restricts infusers from selling products directly to the public. So there's no possible way to have a singular space where a chef could prepare cannabis-infused products and then sell it. That's not all that different than everywhere else in the country, but I just wondered what you guys think as professional chefs. What does that say to you, just sort of about the future of culinary cannabis as sort of like an art form, if you will, that's like really evolved in the past 15 years or so?
I think that's temporary. I think that the state just hasn't, and like some other states, we haven't had the opportunity to really do our research, do our homework on what are the positive and negative effects on consuming cannabis in general population. We haven't been able to do those studies, so I can see why the FDA and why the Department of Agriculture, all these organizations are reluctant to start opening up restaurants because then you'll have massive people coming in and eating edibles. And, we don't know what could happen. So I understand the reluctance, but I think it's temporary because for the same reason, well, like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, nobody thought we were going to legalize cannabis here. And now we're talking on the stage about edibles and making cannabis food. So like the natural direction of this whole thing is, of course, we're going to have places. Because how are we going to legalize cannabis in the state for adults and not give adults a place to use it responsibly? So I think that is it's just like a right now thing. You're just prioritizing certain things to get those passed, dispensaries, cultivation, and I'm surprised I had infusion on it as well for licenses. But I'm pretty sure, but it's just going to be a very short term until we get to that point. But there's going to be so many ancillary opportunities besides doing underground dinners. We'll have plenty of legal opportunities to continue to cook with cannabis. But as far as the underground or illicit market, it's going to be dependent on us to have more education and teach more chefs and more cooks what cannabis is, break it down, and how to talk to it with people when it comes to food. So the more that this education comes out, I think these rules are going to start to loosen up, and then we're going to start to make our way. It's Chicago. It's a world-class food scene. How are you going to not give us a place to eat and consume our weed? This is also one of the highest consumption cities in the whole world for cannabis. The two are naturally destined together. It's going to happen.
That's why before we open it up.
I agree with Annie. I think that it's honestly, a matter of months before I think politics and lobbyists and anyone in between that's really giving us some resistance to start seeing like, oh, we can make some money off this. I guess we will open it up to consumption lounges. And then to add to it, that I can say oops, because I've been doing, oops, I didn't know this. I've been doing my dinners and advertising it and freely having them.
So that's all over them, right?
It's all over, yeah. So definitely, I think, it's something that we're finding resistance on right now, kind of like we did alcohol at some point. And what happened with that, we had some underground people still make, alcohol and, people didn't get sick off of it and, so I think that's kind of where we are with cannabis. We're finding resistance, but once people find out that they're going to make some money off of it, they're going to open it up.
All right. Do you guys have questions for our esteemed panel of chefs? Yes, sir.
How do you get on the list for these dinners?
You go on our websites. Feel free to, I can plug mine in. It's planda.co. That's planda.co. And Annie, you.
Mine's Herbal Notes, HERBALNOTES.co.
Do you have to be a patient?
It'll pop up. No, but I do discount for patients.
Same, you don't have to be a patient, but you get a discount.
Anyone else? Questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, well, a lot of the conversation today has been around using like commercially prepared extracts in food applications, but I work in the beverage industry. I was curious, obviously, like high-proof alcohol is a good solvent for what you want. Incorporate THC and all the cannabinoids in like beverage applications, but for people that are not interested or don't want to consume alcohol, I was wondering if y'all had any thoughts on incorporating that in non-alcoholic, just beverage applications.
Yeah, so there are definitely ways to incorporate, but I mean, it's really dependent on the, commercial grade water soluble concentrates, which are a little bit harder to get. They're non-alcoholic. They'll mix in with any drink, any liquid base. It won't just float to the top. It's not just oil. So
still a little bit hard to come by right now. We're a little early in the stage for products like that, like those. They exist in other places, but some do. They do exist.
CBD.
Oh yeah, well there's water soluble CBD as well. So yeah, those kind of products for non-alcoholic beverages are starting to make their way. There's commercial companies now that are starting to, send us your recipe, we'll formulate a water soluble CBD version of it and send it right back to you.
Yeah, I guess as far as like the home chef or beverage person, is there a good route for them to incorporate?
Yeah, I mean, we do it with garnishes. Things that can go around the rim or as a garnish to go with it. Otherwise, it's only really available for a drink in, its lipid form and as a fat, which you could, add to like a tapioca starch, for example, and then make a powderized version of that fat and then run it around the rim. Now you have a garnish that you can play with, so when you drink it, it melts. So there's like different, molecular gastronomy type techniques that you can use to be, playful without the alcohol.
Does that machine that you mentioned earlier, does it allow you to make concentrates with liquids?
Any fat.
Oh.
And yes.
Levo
2 is the other one that's on.
It's only fat soluble.
The difference is the first part.
That's only fat soluble, right?
Yeah, you can only add butter or any kind of oil-based liquid into that chamber. And the difference is that the first one, it was only for infusion, so you put in your dry buds, and then you add your, you had to decarb it, and then you put it in there, and it really just warmed it up to a certain temperature. So I thought that was a waste of money. But then the second one, now it does everything for you all in one shot. So you can put your raw product in there, and then now there's a pretty cool app that it's connected to. There's like recipes on the app. And then basically you can just watch it from your phone, understanding the temperature where it's at. It's at 250 now it's getting up to 270. I know what terpenes are below, starting to boil off. You can cut it with your phone, so it's really user-friendly.
We have time for one or two more questions. Yes, sir, Lorette.
Can you describe a little bit about the sous vide technique that you were talking about earlier? Specifically, the temperature and time that you're using to decarb in that scenario?
Yeah, so sous vide, most circulators are actually, I think all of them, they don't really go past 212 degrees, I believe. So that's really low. That's really low for the decarb process. So that's why when I'm doing that process, it's not for the sake of extracting THC or converting the decarboxylating the THCA into THC. That is not my goal. My goal is to preserve the terpenes and the flavor. So I'll actually have it there at the highest setting. Even for like 3 to 4 hours, you kind of just like set it, forget it, and you're really not going to do much to it because, or nothing's really going to happen to it beyond very, very minuscule amounts of decarboxylation, and none of the volatile terpenes will obviously evaporate because they're in a sealed bag. You can do that with a mason jar and type it in.
Is it a function of time though, if you left it in, say, more than 4 hours?
Yeah, more than 4 hours.
Would you eventually
It'll get there. It'll definitely get there, but it'll take a really long time, kind of more than it's worth it. So if you're going, in that case, you're probably just better off decarboxylating and dry in the oven.
Well,
the THC is the goal.
The terpene preservation was interesting to me, and I wondered if you could do a really long decarb in a sous vide method and wind up with a fairly high THC content and still have preserved your terpenes.
Well, I have done it as long as, I believe, 6 to 8 hours. But yeah, and I preserved the flavor. I was using it mostly for a flavoring. I think it was for like cured hamachi, and I infused blood orange as well into that oil. So I just tossed all of that in. It was really more for the flavor to complement. Okay. And then we added THC to the final dish.
Maybe left as an experiment for the questioner.
Yeah, no, exactly. Get one of those. I forgot what they're called, but they're little testing kits. They're like probably $200 maybe. and then you could easily put your sample in there, and I think in like an hour or less, you'll have your full spectrum, your cannabinoid analysis.
Fantastic. Where should I go?
I'm gonna look it up online right now, and I'll find it.
It's the T-check.
T-check, yeah, that's what it is. Yep.
T-check. Thank you.
I think by time.
Because there's one really
No more?
quick one we could, but they've got an event right after this.
This one's for Mindy.
Oh, it's louder.
After the first, where can I find your music connections?
Every distillery.
Yeah, excellent.
But if you wanted to, you could go on a plane and you could go to Nevada, because they're in Nevada.
Oh.
And soon to be California, Massachusetts, where else? Michigan, Arizona, maybe Arizona. Yeah. So Nevada now.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mark.
Is there any worry about when you're consuming it, like with alcohol, if you have a liver issue, when it gets processed through the liver, is there any worry when you're consuming it that it's going to affect your liver? Oh, sorry.
I'm not a medical expert, but I've taken courses and I've spoken to a lot of medical practitioners. And yes, it is processed through the liver. And they recommend that anyone that uses cannabis on a regular basis through any method whatsoever get their liver checked regularly, just like someone who's on statins or any other drug that can really, toll a lot on your liver. So if you have a concern, speak to your doctor. It's really good to be open with your physician about your cannabis use, regardless of the method and whether you're using it medicinally or so-called recreationally. But a lot of the rec use, we know people are managing stress, anxiety, sleep issues. So the physician should be open to it.
Right.
Our time has come to an end.
What's up, bud? How you doing? Hey, good.
Oh, good, man. Some of the vendors might still be set up next door. If you haven't had a chance to go in, you can go ahead and stop by. And thank you all for coming. And check your video because we've got a lot of cannabis
I told my dealer, hey, you and me, we're staying till the end, buddy.
I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
They give away the next